On the dazzling New Year's Eve, when the entire city was counting down to welcome the new year, Noelle Paquette, a 27-year-old girl, stepped out of the party and walked home. No one knew those were her last steps. Noelle was a dedicated teacher, devoted to her family and community. But in minutes, she vanished. Her family frantically searched, while the police believed she simply needed time to calm down. However, strange things began to happen. A white car, two strangers, and a turn into the darkness. Only one witness saw Noelle get into the car before everything went silent. Everyone was shocked to learn that her disappearance led to one of the most heinous crimes in Canadian history, committed by a couple with a cruel fetish far beyond human imagination. When all the clues came together, the shocking truth was revealed. Noelle was not just lost. She was being hunted. Noelle Paquette was born on December 11, 1985. She was an active and friendly girl who easily connected with everyone, regardless of their age or social status. She was the second of 4 siblings in a close-knit family. Noelle attended high school in Sarnia, where she studied diligently and always knew what she wanted in life. Education and career were her top priorities. Although she wanted to start a family, she wanted to fulfill her dreams and become independent first. After graduating with excellent grades, she moved to Ottawa to pursue a bachelor's degree. Eventually, she found her true passion for teaching while in South Korea and enrolled in university to earn her teaching diploma. Everyone says that Noelle dearly loves her friends, and vice versa. However, her trustfulness sometimes led to difficulties. After obtaining her diploma, she began teaching at an elementary school and became a member of the student council within a few years. Despite her professional success, her personal life was challenging. Though she had romantic relationships and had a child, her first relationship ended, leaving her as a single mother. This change affected her daily life. Full-time work became difficult, so during her maternity leave, she became a teacher at a kindergarten near her home. When her child grew older, she was able to return to a normal life. Besides work, she also volunteered at an organization that helps people with disabilities and participated in a charity that supports children with serious illnesses. Despite her busy schedule, she still made time for soccer, the gym, and spending time with family and friends. By the end of 2012, Noelle was 27 years old. She dreamed of having a large family, continuing her career, and starting a relationship with a new boyfriend. On December 31st, she attended a party with friends. Unfortunately, the night started off poorly, as tensions arose between her and her boyfriend. After midnight, a conflict escalated, prompting Noelle to leave the party early. She is having difficulty finding a car to go home. At around 2:00 a.m., she left the party and said that she would walk home. Even though the distance takes about 20 minutes by car, her friends tried to persuade her to stay. But she didn't want to stay with her boyfriend and needed time to calm down. Unable to get a taxi, she decided to walk home. Despite their warnings, by 2:30 a.m., her boyfriend was worried. He had been trying to reach her since she left, initially thinking she would soon return, as she had done in the past during disagreements. When she didn't answer and her calls went to voicemail, he grew anxious and decided to check the route she might have taken, but found no sign of her. He then assumed she had likely gotten a ride with someone else and stopped searching, believing she just needed time alone. The next morning, Noelle's parents discovered that their daughter was missing. She had promised to come home after the party to spend time with her family and children the next day, but that didn't happen. They tried calling her cell phone multiple times, but there was no response. Growing worried, they first contacted Noelle's boyfriend, thinking she might have stayed over with him. He told them that she had left the party following a small argument and hadn't reached out to him since. Everyone, especially Noelle's mother, was very worried upon learning of the situation. On January 13, 2013, she called the police to report her daughter missing. Unfortunately, the officers were hesitant to take the case seriously, assuming Noelle had simply overindulged on New Year's Eve and would return home soon. Instead of searching for her, they went about their daily routines. While her family and friends decided to organize their own search, they contacted everyone who had attended the party. But no one had seen Noelle since she left. Her phone still went unanswered. After pressure from her family, the police finally began searching for Noelle. The investigation deepened, and the situation became increasingly serious as there were no signs of her being active, no access to social media, and no use of credit cards. Significantly, she hadn't contacted her family or her child, which was completely out of character for her. To shape their investigation, detectives started interviewing others who were at the party, particularly Noelle's boyfriend. Given their argument that night, he stated that he had left to look for Noelle but did not return. Others at the party corroborated this. He asserted that after unsuccessful searching, he simply returned home. But no one could confirm his story, making his alibi questionable. While he cooperated with law enforcement, describing his relationship with Noelle as serious and generally stable, he admitted that their disagreements could escalate. The police found no evidence against him and no prior criminal record, making him appear innocent. Everyone depicted him as calm and composed, incapable of violence. Even those at the party saw their disagreement as minor, with no physical confrontation occurring. As detectives pursued new leads, Noelle's family continued their own investigation. They made flyers with her picture and reached out to local residents. The mother and her youngest daughter showed Noelle's photo to people they encountered on the street. One man recognized her. He had been returning from a bar that night and noticed Noelle walking alone along a deserted road. He described her as being far behind him, but catching his eye, he saw a car pull up next to her. And after a brief exchange, she got in. What followed raised suspicions. Another man, previously unnoted, ran toward the white car. Instead of driving away, the car backed up and the stranger jumped into the back seat. The car then sped off quickly, squealing its tires. Initially, the witness didn't think much of it, but later he regretted not reporting it to the police. When Noelle's mother relayed this account at the police station, detectives became interested and decided to interview the witness personally. His account seemed plausible, especially after they reviewed CCTV footage from the area. Noelle was seen walking down the street, but then disappeared from the camera's view. The footage captured a white Pontiac, which a witness identified as the vehicle that had picked up both Noelle and a strange man. Unfortunately, the car soon left the city and moved toward the interurban highway, causing it to go out of sight. However, this information revealed a troubling coincidence. Around 4 a.m., on New Year's Eve, a highway patrol officer noticed the same white Pontiac about 30 kilometers from Sarnia. The car was stopped on the side of the road with its hazard lights on, smoke rising from the hood, and both the driver and passenger attempting to extinguish a fire. A police officer, thinking they needed help, approached. A 19-year-old man was outside looking at the engine, while a 31-year-old woman was inside. The headlights illuminated their hands, faces, and clothes, which were covered in odd stains that looked like blood. They appeared to have been in some kind of accident and needed assistance. The woman got out and admitted to the police officer that her hands were covered in blood, but didn't specify the cause. The car belonged to Tanya Bogdanovich, and the young man with her introduced himself as Michael McGregor. Tanya explained that she and Michael had gone into the woods for privacy. They enjoyed extreme forms of intimacy, including tying each other up and using knives. After examining them, the police observed that they had several stab wounds, scratches, and abrasions, but none appeared to be life-threatening. Tanya insisted that their injuries were caused by the use of sharp objects during intimacy, claiming they accidentally hurt each other. Although this explained the blood, it did not sound very convincing. Michael supported her story, but neither could satisfactorily explain why they chose to engage in such intimate activities in a secluded forest at night. Although their car was inoperable, they insisted they didn't need help. However, the officers prioritized their own safety and called for emergency assistance. Tanya and Michael were taken to a medical center, leaving their car behind for later towing. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics noticed their strange behavior. In spite of the circumstances, they behaved casually, laughing, hugging, and kissing as though nothing was wrong. While paramedics treated their wounds, police officers looked into their backgrounds. Michael is a pizza delivery man, while Tanya is a nurse with 3 children, working at a nursing home. Finding nothing unusual, the police left the clinic, leaving them alone. However, considering an eyewitness account of Noelle's abduction by a strange couple, the situation seemed increasingly suspicious. Patrol officers reported that Tanya and Michael looked quite frightening, similar to characters in a horror movie, even though they always appeared cheerful and refused any help. This raised red flags about their true intentions. Detectives sought to investigate further and discovered that Michael and Tanya were not married, but merely dating. It turned out that they had met 7 months earlier on a community website, where they quickly connected and started sharing their unique fantasies. Initially, they communicated through messages and later included other community members. Soon after meeting in person, their role-playing became more explicit and disturbing, but they were still not satisfied. Ultimately, they decided to fulfill their darkest fantasies. On January 2, while the investigation was ongoing, a new witness contacted law enforcement to inform them of a woman's body he had discovered. The body was located in a remote wooded area outside of Sarnia, approximately 30 kilometers away. When the police arrived, they quickly recognized that the woman had been violently and brutally murdered. The victim had been mutilated and left in the snow, showing clear signs of a struggle. Her hands, face, and upper body had wounds consistent with self-defense, and there were numerous marks indicating torture. Official identification confirmed that the victim was 27-year-old Noelle Paquette. Most of her injuries seemed to have been caused by a bladed weapon, likely a small knife. A forensic expert identified marks from 2 different knives, suggesting the involvement of 2 assailants. In addition, Noelle was also subjected to abuse. The absence of snow during the New Year's holiday made it easier to gather evidence. Many footprints were found near her body and traced back to a white Pontiac vehicle. A couple, Tanya and Michael, were discovered in that same car with their hazard lights on, close to the forest where the body was found. Police suspected them of being involved in the murder, so they collected their clothes and personal items for forensic analysis. Although Tanya and Michael were initially released, the police later issued arrest warrants just 2 days after Noelle's body was found. Tanya, a mother of 3, was arrested in a hospital parking lot while accompanying Michael, who was there to get stitches for injuries he sustained during the attack. He allegedly cut himself. Upon his release, he was also taken into custody. With the suspects now apprehended, detectives began piecing together the events of that New Year's Eve, a task that proved more challenging than anticipated. They utilized electronic evidence, including texts, emails, social media posts, and private messages exchanged between Tanya and Michael, to help solve the case. During the interrogations, Tanya and Michael consistently denied any involvement in the murder of Noelle. However, as they spoke, detectives uncovered numerous inconsistencies in their statements. They initially described their relationship in vague terms, referring to themselves as playmates or best friends. Despite a 12-year age gap and differing lifestyles, sometimes they compared themselves to wild animals, revealing glimpses of their unusual tendencies. Their exchanges quickly shifted from a flirtatious relationship to discussions of crime and cruel games. Both Tanya and Michael shared morbid fantasies about intimacy in the woods, abuse, dominance, and murder. Their communications revealed that their first intimate encounter occurred in June 2012 at the same forest where Noelle was killed. In their role-playing, it was alleged that Michael abused Tanya, which she later described as empowering. Michael responded by claiming that she had awakened his sadistic side, enjoying the humiliation and fear he inflicted upon her. In her view, these encounters were preparation for something more serious. Their encounters for intimate activities became more frequent, including public meetings. They documented these events in a blog under pseudonyms, taking names from cartoon characters. Their blog posts detailed scenes of bondage, role-playing, and taboo interactions, such as leading each other around malls on leashes and in handcuffs. Over time, their violent fantasies grew more extreme, indicating an insatiable desire. By September 2012, they began discussing the need for a third person to join their games, quickly realizing that they wanted a real victim to torture, abuse, and murder. After finalizing her plan, Tanya began to act. She went to a hardware store and bought 2 knives, a fact confirmed during the investigation. These knives later became the murder weapons. Shortly after buying the knives, Tanya gifted Michael a digital photo frame filled with images of young girls, all sharing a common trait: they were young and innocent, similar to the type her boyfriend preferred. Included in these images was a girl Tanya knew personally. They then began searching for a victim. But Noelle wasn't on their list. They spent nearly 3 months preparing for their crime, and by New Year's Eve, they were ready to commit acts of abuse and murder. However, the girl Michael had chosen wasn't there. Her plan changed at the last minute, and she left town for the holidays. This saved her life, but made Noelle a target. Tanya and Michael refused to abandon their violent intentions. The day before the planned murder, Tanya informed Michael that they would need to select a victim at random. This forced them to change their plan. They decided to find any young woman on the street and set up an elaborate trap. Tanya would drive with Michael, both observing and searching for a suitable victim. When they spotted a target, Michael would get out of the car and watch her from a distance. Tanya would approach the woman herself and lure her into the car. Then she would pick up Michael. While in the back seat, Michael would use a knife to threaten the victim. Their plan unfolded flawlessly. A background check revealed they didn't know Noelle. Unfortunately, she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. While Noelle enjoyed a party with friends and her boyfriend, Tanya, who worked at a nursing home, spent her days and evenings texting Michael, assuring him that their plan would succeed on New Year's Eve. Additionally, finding taxis or transportation on New Year's Eve was a challenge, as many would be seeking rides. Tanya finished her shift at 11:00 p.m. and met Michael on the city embankment to celebrate New Year's. They lit some fireworks, discussed their plan, and began their hunt. True to their expectations, Tanya took the wheel, believing that a woman driving would appear more trustworthy than a stranger trying to help. This tactic proved effective when Tanya approached Noelle, who gratefully accepted the offer of a ride home. Once Noelle was inside, Tanya reversed the car, and Michael entered the backseat to execute their plan. Michael quickly brandished a knife, putting it against Noelle's throat and threatening her life. As Noelle complied without resistance, they drove her on quiet, dark roads 30 kilometers outside the city to a remote forest. They intended to drive further, but their white car unexpectedly broke down near the woods. Unbothered by the situation, Tanya and Michael forced Noelle out of the car, dragged her into the woods, and subjected her to abuse, torture, and, ultimately, murder. An autopsy revealed she suffered countless stab wounds, damaging her heart, lungs, liver, and other critical organs. However, the fatal injury was a deep cut to her throat. Her body was left in the woods, stripped of her clothes and personal belongings. Tanya and Michael tried to escape but were unsuccessful because their car broke down. Fortunately, they attracted the attention of patrol officers. Otherwise, finding them would have been very difficult. The investigation lasted nearly 3 years, aiming to reconstruct the sequence of events. During this time, a great deal of evidence was gathered against Tanya and Michael, including digital data and expert analysis results from the white Pontiac. By the end of 2015, all the details surrounding Noelle's horrific death had been clarified, and a preliminary hearing was scheduled for December. Tanya and Michael had initially denied their involvement in the crime. However, surprisingly, just before the trial began, they pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, choosing to forego a trial. This decision was likely influenced by the overwhelming evidence against them, as a confession might have been their only chance to lessen the severity of their sentences. Noelle's relatives believe that Tanya and Michael avoided revealing gruesome details of the murder to avoid public outrage, hoping to receive a lighter sentence. In 2016, both Tanya Bogdanovich and Michael McGregor were sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, the maximum penalty under Canadian law. The judge made it clear that they had committed one of the most brutal crimes in Canadian history. In addition to life imprisonment, Tanya and Michael were placed in a DNA database, added to the National Abuser List, and banned from owning firearms for life. They were also forbidden from contacting Noelle's family and friends. Shortly after, Tanya, 34, and Michael, 22, expressed apologies to Noelle's parents, but many found their apologies insincere. Although Canadian law didn't allow for a harsher sentence, some still felt the sentences were too lenient. Relatives of Noelle expressed their concerns, with her mother revealing that she had suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression following her daughter's death. She was haunted by nightmares and unable to return to work even 3 years later. That morning in Northwest Houston started like any other. The street was quiet, the houses looked the same, and there were no sounds of sirens or screams. But behind the closed door of a house on Emma Forrest Street, an unnatural silence had fallen. On March 12, 2025, 32-year-old Kristen Chavez was found dead inside her own home, a place that should have been safe. People quickly realized that she had been murdered. The prime suspect was the person closest to her husband. There was no need for a manhunt. He was still at the house when the police arrived. There was blood, a common household object used as a weapon, and 4 dogs were missing, having disappeared sometime before Kristen's death. The mystery was, what happened in those last, quiet hours, as if nothing violent had ever taken place? The story begins with a door in Northwest Houston and a moment that feels too still for morning. On March 12, 2025, Kristen Chavez, 32, is found dead inside her home on Emma Forrest Street in the Oak Forest area. Pronounced at the scene, her death is quickly treated as a homicide. A single fact anchors the first hours. Police say her husband, Chance Chavez, 34, is arrested and charged with murder. Outside, the neighborhood looks like any other. Lawns, driveways, the quiet geometry of ordinary life. Inside, investigators are faced with a kind of violence that doesn't fit the setting. Court reporting later describes an iron split, damage linked by prosecutors to the attack, a domestic object reframed as a weapon. The air around the case turns cold fast, not because the public knows everything, but because they know enough. A woman is dead, the suspect is close, the scene is personal. According to the reporting on what officers encountered, Chance Chavez is at the home when police arrive. Prosecutors would later describe him with blood on his body and clothing, raising his hands as if surrendering. It is an early investigative turning point, not a long search, not a stranger in the dark, but a case that collapses inward toward the people already inside the frame. And then there is the detail that doesn't belong to the script of a typical call-out. Family members and local reporting say Kristen's dogs, 4 of them, were allegedly taken and abandoned along the Katy Freeway hours before she was found. It lands like a flare over the city, a clue, a distraction, or a signature, something that invites witnesses, tips, and public emotion before investigators have even finished photographing the walls. One fact is clear: early, Kristen is gone, and the investigation begins at home. The feeling is harder to quantify. A closed door can hold an entire storm. The leading question tightens as daylight spreads across Emma Forrest Street. If the evidence points inward so quickly, what was happening in the hours before police arrived? The case is only opening, but already it's moving toward the past, toward the marriage, toward the patterns investigators look for when violence erupts in private. Before the violence becomes public record, Kristen exists in quieter facts. She is 32 years old. She lives in Northwest Houston. She works. She keeps dogs. She has a routine that, until it breaks, appears ordinary. According to family statements and early reporting, nothing in the days immediately before her death suggests she was planning to disappear. There is no packed bag, no goodbye message, no sign she is preparing to leave her life behind. The silence comes abruptly. Friends and relatives later describe Kristen as close to her family, engaged with her everyday world, and anchored by responsibilities that assume a future. The home in Emma Forrest is not described as temporary. It is a place of settling, yet, according to accounts shared after her death, there are hints, small, incomplete, of strain inside the marriage. Nothing formally documented as criminal, nothing that triggers outside intervention. The kind of tension that often remains private until it can no longer. Investigators working backward focus on routine because routine is what collapses first. Phone activity, daily movements, whether she answered messages, whether she showed up where she was expected. According to the investigation file, there is no evidence that Kristen leaves the house alive after a certain point. Her world narrows to the interior of her home, to a timeline measured in hours rather than days. The dogs become part of that backward walk. Family members would later say they believe the dogs were removed from the home before Kristen's death. That detail matters because it suggests forethought, an action taken not in panic, but in preparation. It reframes the hours before the killing as a sequence, not an explosion. Someone is thinking ahead. Someone is making choices. Emotion enters the case through absence. Kristen does not call anyone for help. There is no confirmed emergency call from her phone. No neighbor reports hearing a disturbance loud enough to trigger a police response. The house holds its secret long enough for the night to pass into morning. That quiet weighs heavily in domestic homicide investigations, where violence often unfolds without witnesses and ends before anyone outside knows to listen. Police attention begins to settle on the relationship itself, not because of gossip, but because statistics and case history demand it. Intimate partners are always examined first. Alibis are tested, timelines are tightened, financial and digital records are flagged for later review. At this stage, investigators are not proving guilt. They are establishing context. Who had access? Who had a motive? Who was present when the silence began? One fact remains steady. Kristen does not leave her home alive. The feeling beneath it is unease, the sense that whatever happened was not spontaneous, but building quietly behind closed doors. And the question investigators cannot avoid is simple and heavy. If the warning signs were subtle, what did they add up to in the final hours before her voice went quiet? When investigators step inside the house on Emma Forrest, the scene does not shout. It tells its story slowly. According to court filings and police statements, Kristen was found with fatal injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. The medical examiner will later confirm homicide. The fact is stark. The atmosphere is colder still. This is not a break-in, not a chaotic ransacking. It is a domestic space altered by violence, where everyday objects remain close at hand. Among those objects is an iron. Prosecutors will later identify it as the alleged weapon. Its presence matters because it anchors the crime in the ordinary. No firearm brought from outside. No blade is hidden on a person. Something is already in the house. Something within reach. According to the investigation file, the iron is damaged, split in a way consistent with repeated force. That detail becomes a pivot. It suggests not a single impulsive strike, but sustained violence. Blood evidence reinforces that reading. Investigators document blood on the suspect's body and clothing, and blood at the scene. The distribution is important. It places violence inside the home and ties it to proximity. There is no indication of an attempt to clean the scene before the police arrive. No elaborate staging. The story the house tells is one of immediacy events that moved faster than any plan to conceal them afterward. Yet the crime scene also raises restraint questions. There are no signs of forced entry, no broken doors or windows. That absence narrows the field. It supports a theory that Kristen knew the person who killed her. Someone she allowed close. Someone is already inside. In domestic homicide cases, this pattern is familiar, and investigators treat it carefully, aware of how often familiarity becomes leverage. Time becomes the next variable. When exactly did the assault occur? How long was Kristen alone afterward? According to police, the timeline is reconstructed through phone data, witness statements, and the discovery of her body. There is no confirmed emergency call from her phone, no final message. The silence is total. It suggests the violence was sudden and overwhelming, leaving no space to reach outside the room. One fact crystallizes as evidence is logged and photographed. The crime scene does not point outward. It points inward, toward the relationship and the hours immediately before the killing. The feeling it leaves behind is claustrophobic, the sense of a life ending without escape, inside familiar walls. And the question investigators carry forward is unavoidable. If the house tells the truth, why were steps allegedly taken outside its steps involving the dogs before Kristen was killed? Hours before Kristen is found dead, something happens that does not fit the quiet geometry of the house. According to family members and early reporting cited in the investigation file, 4 of Kristen's dogs were allegedly removed from the home and abandoned along the Katy Freeway. Some are found wandering near traffic, others are recovered later. The fact is unusual enough to pull the case into public view almost immediately. For investigators, the dogs are not a sideshow. They are a timeline marker, living evidence that someone left the house, traveled a distance, and made deliberate choices before returning or not returning. This is not an act that happens during a sudden fight. It requires time, transportation, intention. It introduces the idea of sequencing, suggesting that events unfolded in stages rather than a single moment of loss of control. The image of domesticated animals left in danger resonates far beyond the courtroom. It triggers calls, tips, outrage. But detectives work to strip away emotion and focus on function. Why remove the dogs at all? In domestic homicide investigations, animals often represent obstacles, witnesses that bark, disruptions that draw attention. Their removal can indicate planning, or at least an attempt to create conditions for privacy. The freeway itself matters. The Katy Freeway is busy, visible, and unpredictable. Abandoning animals there risks public discovery. That risk raises questions. Was the goal to permanently get rid of them, or simply to remove them from the house temporarily? Investigators consider whether this act was meant to delay discovery, prevent interference, or serve as a distraction. According to the investigation file, there is no evidence that the dogs were harmed, but their abandonment is treated as an intentional act tied to the larger sequence of events. Witness accounts become critical here. Drivers, passers-by, anyone who may have seen a vehicle stop, doors open, and animals released. This is where a private crime brushes against public space. Surveillance cameras, traffic cameras, cell phone pings. The investigation widens briefly, not to look for a stranger, but to document movement. One fact anchors the theory building: the dogs are allegedly gone before Kristen's death. The feeling surrounding that fact is deeply unsettling, a sense that choices were made in advance of violence. And the question investigators begin to ask grows sharper. If someone took the time to remove the dogs, what does that say about what they believed was coming next? The case tightens as attention turns back toward the person police say was inside the house when they arrived. The next layer is not about animals or highways, but about a suspect standing in the doorway of the crime scene itself. When police arrive at the house on Emma Forest, they do not search the neighborhood. They do not set up roadblocks. According to police statements and court reporting, the suspect is already there. Chance, Kristen's husband, is at the home when officers make contact. The fact is immediate and inescapable. This is not a case that unfolds over miles. It collapses into a single address. Prosecutors later describe what officers observe: blood on Chance's body and clothing, his hands raised. His presence is framed by the doorway of the house where Kristen is dead inside. According to the investigation file, this moment becomes a critical anchor point. It shortens the investigative arc dramatically. Instead of asking who might have entered the home, detectives focus on what happened between the two people who lived there. Arrests in domestic homicide cases are often quiet, procedural, no chase, no dramatic confession, just a tightening of handcuffs and a shift from scene management to case building. Chance is taken into custody and later charged with murder. The legal language is firm, but restrained. Allegations, not conclusions. Evidence, not verdicts. Investigators begin constructing the suspect profile not from rumor, but from proximity and access. He had keys, he had time, he had an opportunity. These are not assumptions, they are logistical facts. Detectives review phone records, financial activity, and movements tied to his name. They examine injuries. They document statements. At this stage, inconsistencies matter more than motives. The goal is not to explain why, but to establish what can be proven. The defense posture has not yet fully emerged, but the outline is familiar. Presence does not equal guilt. Blood can be explained. Silence can be strategic. Investigators know this. That is why physical evidence becomes central. The alleged weapon, the condition of the scene, the absence of forced entry, the dogs on the freeway. Each detail either tightens or loosens the narrative around the suspect. Emotion enters not through courtroom arguments, but through contrast. A husband, a home, a body discovered within shared walls. The feeling is one of compression lives, evidence, and timelines pressing inward toward a single figure without yet delivering a final answer. Public attention intensifies, but the case remains disciplined, bound by what can be introduced under oath. One fact stands above the rest. Chance is the only person police publicly identify and charge. The atmosphere around him is tense, unresolved, and the question that now drives the investigation forward is unavoidable if he is responsible. What pushed the situation from private strain into irreversible violence? That question leads investigators deeper into motive, pressure, and what may have been building beneath the surface long before police crossed the threshold. With the suspect identified and charged, the investigation shifts from proximity to pressure. Why is it always the hardest question? According to prosecutors, motive is not a single moment but an accumulation. Detectives begin examining the space between Kristen and Chance Chavez, where arguments, expectations, and control may have lived long before the night turned violent. Financial records come under scrutiny, bank accounts, spending patterns, obligations are shared and separate. According to court discussions referenced in public reporting, investigators look for stressors that could sharpen conflict debts, disputes over money, or pressures tied to maintaining a household. Nothing here is dramatic on its own. It rarely is. Motive often hides in mundane details that, over time, gain weight. Control becomes another investigative lens. In domestic homicide cases, violence is often preceded by attempts to manage space, movement, or autonomy. The alleged removal of the dogs returns to the foreground, not as an emotional act, but as a functional one. Prosecutors suggest it may reflect an effort to control the environment, to reduce noise, resistance, or interference. If true, it reframes the act as preparation rather than panic. This is where cases become uncomfortable. The evidence no longer sits on a table, it stretches into daily life. Phone records are examined for tone as much as timing. Messages are read not for romance, but for strain. According to the investigation file, there is no indication of an external affair or third-party intrusion driving events. The focus remains inward. At this stage, the prosecution does not need to prove motive beyond a reasonable doubt. They need coherence, a narrative that aligns actions with outcomes. The iron, the blood, the dogs, the absence of forced entry, the presence of the accused. Each piece does not scream motive, but together they suggest escalation, a situation that crossed a line rather than erupted from nothing. Emotion in this phase is subdued but ominous. Motive building is slow and methodical. It lacks spectacle, but it sharpens the case. For the family of Kristen, this is where grief meets explanation, though explanation does not equal comfort. Understanding why does not undo what happened. One fact remains central. Prosecutors continue to hold Chance as the sole suspect. The feeling surrounding that fact is tightening inevitability, as if the case is drawing breath before the next legal shift. And the question now facing the court is not just what happened, but how firmly the evidence will hold when tested publicly. That test begins not at the crime scene, but in a courtroom where bond, control, and credibility come into sharp focus. The case moves from the house to the courtroom without losing its weight. Chance stands before a judge, no longer framed by a doorway, but by procedure. According to court records and reporting from the bond hearing, prosecutors argue that the evidence against him is strong and the risk he poses is serious. The charge is murder. The facts presented are measured, not theatrical. Blood evidence, presence at the scene, the alleged weapon, the dogs. Each element is introduced not to persuade the public, but to justify restraint. Bond becomes the focal point. It is not about guilt or innocence. It is about control. Prosecutors request a high bond, pointing to the severity of the crime and the circumstances surrounding it. They argue that release could pose a danger, or at a minimum, undermine the integrity of the process. The defense counters with familiar ground, no prior convictions, community ties, the presumption of innocence. This is the legal rhythm of early homicide cases, where both sides are positioning for what comes next. The judge listens, weighs. According to reporting, the bond is set at a level that reflects the gravity of the charge. It is a procedural decision, but it carries symbolic weight. It signals how the court views the strength of the case at this stage, not as a conclusion, but as a threshold crossed. The atmosphere in the courtroom is restrained, almost clinical. There are no outbursts, no dramatic testimony, yet the tension is unmistakable. Kristen is absent, but present in every reference to the victim. Her name is spoken carefully. Her life was reduced, for now, to evidentiary relevance. This is how the system works, even when it feels insufficient. Public reaction simmers outside the courtroom. The detail of the dogs, the domestic setting, the immediacy of the arrest all have already shaped opinion. But inside, the case remains insulated from emotion. Judges do not rule on outrage. They rule on risk, law, and precedent. Control, again, becomes the quiet theme. Who controls the narrative? Who controls movement? Who controls the pace of justice? One fact is now fixed. Chance remains charged with murder as the case moves forward. The feeling is one of suspended gravity, as if everything is held in place, waiting. And the question that lingers is larger than this single hearing. How will this case resolve when evidence is tested fully, and what will remain for those left behind when the legal process ends? That question carries the story beyond verdicts and bond amounts, into the aftermath where justice intersects with memory, and where the consequences of violence continue long after the courtroom empties. After the courtroom quiets, the case does not end. It lingers. Kristen Chavez's name remains attached to filings, hearings, and headlines, but for her family, the aftermath is not procedural. It is permanent. According to public statements and reporting, those closest to her are left navigating two parallel realities: the legal process, unfolding in slow motion, and the absence that never pauses. One fact defines the outcome at this stage. Kristen is dead, and her husband remains charged with her murder. The case has not yet reached final adjudication. There is no verdict carved in stone. Allegations remain allegations until proven in court. But the trajectory is set. Evidence has been logged. Timelines drawn. A suspect has been identified. The system has taken custody of the truth-seeking process. Domestic homicide cases rarely offer a clean closure, even when convictions occur. Answers can arrive without relief. Sentences can be handed down without healing. For Kristen's family, the future is divided into before and after, with no bridge between the two. The house in Emma Forest becomes a symbol not of home, but of rupture. Public attention fades, as it often does. New cases emerge, headlines shift, but certain details from this one persist in collective memory: the iron-turned weapon, the dogs on the freeway, the speed with which the investigation narrowed inward. These elements are not just facts, they are warnings. They illustrate how violence can coexist with routine, how danger can grow in familiar spaces without drawing notice until it is too late. Social lessons surface quietly. This case reinforces what research and case history have long shown. Domestic violence does not always announce itself. It escalates behind closed doors. It exploits trust, proximity, and silence. When it surfaces, it often does so catastrophically. Prevention depends not only on law enforcement but on awareness, intervention, and the willingness to take early signs seriously. Kristen Chavez is remembered not for how she died, but for the life that was interrupted, plans unfinished, relationships severed, a future removed from its own timeline. The justice system will continue its work, methodically, imperfectly. Whatever its final outcome, it cannot return what was taken. One fact remains unaltered by any ruling. Kristen's absence reshaped lives. The feeling left behind is quiet grief, layered with unease. And the question that endures, long after this case file closes, is one society must keep asking how many warnings go unheard before silence becomes irreversible. This case ends here. The lesson does not. Some disappearances begin not with screams, but with silence. A man doesn't come home. A phone call goes unanswered. As time passes, it becomes a threat. In June 2010, Kevin Mengel, a 33-year-old husband and father of 3, disappeared from his life in Chester County, Pennsylvania. He left no note and showed no signs of wanting to leave. He simply vanished. His house was normal, with the lights on and his children's toys scattered about. It was as if life had been paused, but no one knew why. At first, everyone wondered where Kevin had gone. But as time went on, the question changed too. If Kevin didn't leave on his own, who gained the most from his disappearance? The story then shifted from a missing person case to a look at an ordinary family, a failing marriage, and a truth that emerged too late to help anyone. In June 2010, Kevin Mengel, 33 years old, a husband and the father of 3, was reported missing in Chester County, Pennsylvania. At the beginning, the story is small enough to fit inside a kitchen. A man is not home. A phone does not answer. Hours become a full day. Then another. The air changes in the house, not with shouting, but with the kind of silence that makes ordinary objects feel staged. A child's toy was left in the wrong room. A light is still on. The impression of a life paused mid-step. Investigators have to start where police always start. The simplest explanation that can be tested. Adults do leave. Marriages do crack. A missing husband can be a choice or a warning. Early reporting describes that police initially considered the possibility that Kevin had simply left. A theory that can buy time and sometimes costs it. But family instinct is its own kind of evidence. People who know Kevin begin pushing against the walked-away idea. In accounts later told publicly, the pressure from relatives does not fade with the first report. It sharpens. They look harder. They listen for inconsistencies. They keep calling, even when no one picks up. One fact sits immovable beneath every interpretation. 3 children are waiting for a father who does not arrive. The atmosphere is cold with uncertainty, because missing is a word that pretends time is neutral, when time is the one thing a family cannot afford. And the leading question lands without mercy. If Kevin did not leave on his own, then who benefited from his absence right at the moment he vanished? The next chapter follows the life that looked normal from the outside, and the fractures that may have been widening in the dark, long before anyone dialed 911. The verified fact investigators return to first is simple and uncomfortable. Kevin and his wife, Morgan, were not living the marriage their neighbors thought they saw. According to the investigation file and later court records, the relationship was under strain well before Kevin disappeared in June 2010. Financial pressure existed. Trust was fraying, and within the household, stability was no longer guaranteed. From the outside, the Mengels fit a familiar pattern. Young parents, 3 small children, a shared business, a home rooted in routine. But domestic normalcy is often a performance. Behind closed doors, arguments had reportedly intensified. Friends would later tell investigators that the couple had argued about money and fidelity. These details did not surface immediately. They emerged slowly, as police began reconstructing the weeks before Kevin vanished. The atmosphere during this phase of the investigation is restrained but uneasy. Detectives are careful. A missing person case does not yet grant permission to accuse. Morgan, still legally a wife, presents herself as worried, cooperative, and overwhelmed by the sudden responsibility of caring for 3 children alone. On paper, nothing disqualifies her from sympathy, yet absence creates space, and space invites scrutiny. Investigators begin asking procedural questions that feel invasive, but necessary. When was the last argument? Who saw Kevin last? What was said that morning? Morgan's answers are logged, compared, and revisited, not because they are immediately incriminating, but because consistency matters. And small discrepancies, timing, tone, detail, have a way of expanding under pressure. At the same time, police examine the alternative explanations. Did Kevin have reason to leave voluntarily? Was there another relationship? Was the debt significant enough to run from? Each path is explored, then slowly narrowed. Nothing substantial supports a clean exit. Kevin left behind his children, his belongings, his responsibilities. That fact does not dissolve. The emotional temperature drops further as investigators confront a hard truth. Statistically, when a spouse disappears under unresolved marital conflict, the danger often lives at home. That reality does not accuse. It simply redirects attention, and the leading question becomes unavoidable, pressing against the silence of the house. If the marriage was unraveling, how far had the conflict already gone before Kevin stopped answering his phone? In the next chapter, the investigation drifts outward toward a third presence, entering the orbit of a marriage already under strain. The next verified fact enters the investigation quietly, almost reluctantly. According to court records and later testimony, Morgan was involved in an extramarital relationship at the time of her husband's disappearance. The man's name is Stephen Chappell, an employee connected to the family's landscaping business. His presence does not explode into the case, it seeps in. Affairs, on their own, are not crimes. Investigators know this, but timing is everything. Chappell's connection to Morgan overlaps precisely with the period when the marriage was reportedly deteriorating and Kevin was last seen alive. That overlap changes the geometry of the case. What was once a straight line between husband and wife becomes a triangle. The atmosphere tightens. Interviews take on a sharper edge. Detectives begin mapping proximity, who spoke to whom, and when. Phone records become relevant. Work schedules matter. The question is no longer only where Kevin went, but who else may have had a reason for him not to return. According to the investigation file, Morgan initially minimizes the relationship. Chappell is described as a co-worker, a friend, someone offering emotional support during a difficult marriage. Each of those labels may be partially true. None is definitive. But partial truths often function as camouflage. Chappell himself enters the record as cooperative, at least on the surface. He acknowledges knowing Morgan. He denies involvement in Kevin's disappearance. At this stage, there is no physical evidence tying him to a crime. Nobody. No scene. Only association. And association alone is not enough. Still, detectives note the emotional undercurrent. An affair introduces motive into a case that previously lacked focus. Freedom, fear of exposure, the possibility of a future without an obstacle. These are not accusations. They are investigative realities. What unsettles the inquiry most is not the existence of the relationship, but its secrecy. Text messages, later obtained, suggest a private world running parallel to the marriage one Kevin may or may not have known about. Investigators cannot yet prove that the affair played a role in his disappearance, but they can prove it existed. And once a motive appears, every earlier statement must be re-evaluated. The leading question now presses closer to the center. If Kevin stood in the way of a relationship moving forward, did that make him vulnerable? And did anyone act on that vulnerability? The answer does not come from words. It comes from a discovery in an open field that forces the investigation into its next, irreversible phase. The case changes its nature when Kevin is no longer missing. Months after his disappearance, his remains are discovered in a rural field in Chester County. The location is isolated, not remote enough to disappear forever, but distant enough to delay answers. According to official records, the body is identified as Kevin. The confirmation ends one uncertainty and opens many others. This is the first immovable fact of the investigation. Kevin did not leave on his own. He was killed. The atmosphere turns cold and irreversible. Hope, which had lingered unspoken in the background, collapses. For Kevin's family, the discovery delivers both devastation and clarity. Grief now has a shape, and police now have jurisdiction not just over absence, but over death. The condition of the remains limits what forensic science can immediately answer. Time and exposure have erased some details, but investigators are able to determine that the death was not accidental. According to the investigation file, the manner of death is ruled a homicide. How it happened remains under analysis. That gap matters. But motive and opportunity begin to matter more. With a body recovered, the investigation rewinds. Every timeline is replayed. Every statement is reread with different eyes. The focus narrows sharply back to the last known circle around Kevin, his home, his marriage, and the people closest to it. Morgan is no longer just a worried spouse. She is now the last person known to be tied to Kevin's daily life. Stephen Chappell is no longer a peripheral figure. He is now examined as someone who may have had access, opportunity, and a personal stake in Kevin's absence. Detectives revisit phone records and text messages with urgency. What once looked like emotional venting is now evaluated for planning. What once sounded ambiguous is now weighed against a confirmed death. The tone of the investigation shifts from inquiry to pressure. The leading question hardens into something unavoidable. If Kevin was killed, who knew where to take him, where the land was quiet enough and time slow enough to hide a body? The answer does not arrive in the field. It surfaces in language, short messages, sent in confidence, that begin to contradict grief and expose intent. The next fact enters the case not through soil or bone, but through language. According to court records and evidence later presented, investigators recovered text messages exchanged between Morgan Mengel and Stephen Chappell around the time Kevin disappeared. These messages do not describe confusion. They do not sound like fear. They read with an unsettling calm. Digital evidence has no memory. It preserves tone without context, intention without explanation. And once Kevin's death is confirmed, investigators return to these messages with a colder lens. What once appeared to be emotional reliance now raises sharper questions. Some texts suggest anticipation. Others suggest relief. According to the investigation file, they reference a future that no longer includes Kevin. The atmosphere thickens. Detectives understand that grief usually leaves fingerprints. Panic, repetition, desperation. These messages lack those markers. Instead, they imply coordination. Timing becomes critical. Messages sent before Kevin was reported missing. Messages were sent while his family was still waiting for him to come home. Investigators reconstruct the digital timeline minute by minute. Phones become maps. Cell towers become silent witnesses. They look for overlap moments when Morgan and Chappell's communication aligns with Kevin's last known movements. According to prosecutors, patterns begin to emerge. Not proof on their own, but direction. Morgan is questioned again. This time, with transcripts on the table. She explains the messages as emotional escape, as fantasy, as words spoken under stress. These explanations are logged, but detectives note how often they change. Not dramatically, subtly, enough to matter. Chappell's role sharpens further. His proximity to the family business provided access. His relationship with Morgan provided a motive. His phone records place him within reach of key moments. None of this alone establishes guilt. Together, it tightens the frame. The emotional temperature shifts from suspicion to confrontation. Investigators are no longer asking whether Kevin Mengel is dead. They are asking how his death was discussed before anyone else knew it had happened. The leading question presses with new weight. If these messages were not expressions of grief, then were they traces of planning, and did the words come before the act? The pressure that follows does not stay inside interrogation rooms. It spills into a public moment, where denial meets accusation face to face. The next confirmed moment does not happen behind mirrored glass or inside a courtroom. It happens in daylight, in a parking lot, where grief collides with refusal. According to televised investigative accounts and court records, members of Kevin Mengel's family confront Morgan Mengel directly. By this point, the discovery of Kevin's remains has ended the uncertainty. What remains is denial. The family no longer asks for updates. They ask for truth. The fact is undisputed. The confrontation is recorded and later referenced as a critical, emotional, and psychological pressure point in the case. Morgan is accused openly, not by police, but by those who knew Kevin best. They speak his name. They demand answers. They tell her they believe she knows more than she has said. The atmosphere is tense and exposed. There is no procedural language here, no cautionary script, just a raw accusation in a public space. Morgan does not collapse. She does not confess. She deflects. According to observers, her responses are restrained, defensive, and focused on denial rather than explanation. Investigators watch closely, not because a confrontation proves guilt, but because behavior under pressure reveals structure. Morgan's reactions are later compared to her earlier statements. The gaps widen. Her emotional responses do not align with the timeline investigators are building. Not yet proven, but pattern. Stephen Chappell's presence looms over the exchange, even when he is not physically there. Investigators note that communication between Morgan and Chappell continues after the body is found. According to the investigation file, the messages shift in tone, but not in frequency. That continuity matters. Behind the scenes, detectives are preparing for escalation. They consolidate evidence. They revisit the field. They pressure test alibis. They coordinate interviews with a clearer objective. The case is no longer about what might have happened. It is about what can be proven. The leading question now becomes dangerously narrow. When emotional denial holds under public confrontation, will it hold under legal threat, and who will speak first when the consequences become unavoidable? The answer does not arrive in another argument. It arrives in silence, followed by a decision to plead, rather than explain. The decisive fact arrives without spectacle. Morgan Mengel pleads guilty. According to court records, she admits to first-degree murder and conspiracy in the death of her husband, Kevin Mengel. The plea removes the need for a trial. There will be no jury weighing competing stories, no public reconstruction of every moment. The truth, as defined by the court, is accepted in a single, irreversible act. The atmosphere inside the courtroom is restrained and heavy. Guilty pleas do not provide relief. They provide finality. Morgan does not contest the evidence. She does not force Kevin's family to sit through the testimony. Her admission confirms what investigators had been building toward. Kevin Mengel's death was not an accident, and it was not the work of a stranger. Stephen Chappell follows. He also pleads guilty, according to official sentencing records, to third-degree murder and related charges. His role, as outlined by prosecutors, is that of an accomplice, someone who assisted in carrying out and concealing the crime. He receives a lengthy prison sentence, not life, but decades. The structure of the crime becomes clear in outline, if not in every detail. According to the prosecution, Morgan and Chappell planned Kevin's killing together. The motive is not framed as rage in the moment, but as removal, a future imagined without interference. Kevin is reduced, in that planning, to an obstacle. The emotional temperature shifts again, this time toward quiet devastation. There is no catharsis in a guilty plea. For Kevin's parents, siblings, and friends, the admission confirms the worst conclusion. The danger did not come from outside the home. It lived inside it. Morgan Mengel is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, as mandated by law for first-degree murder. The sentence is procedural. The impact is permanent. The leading question lingers, unresolved in any legal document. When guilt is finally acknowledged, does it explain the violence or only prove that trust was fatally misplaced? The case, however, does not end with sentencing. Its consequences ripple outward, toward the children left behind, and toward the systems that failed to see the danger sooner. Hope Melton was reported missing the day after Christmas. A few weeks later, her body was found. Between her disappearance and the discovery of her body lies a terrifying silence. No witnesses, no cries for help, no sign that anything had gone wrong. She left home, drove down a familiar road, and simply vanished. When police located her car, it was abandoned in a remote area, locked, undisturbed, with no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to explain her disappearance. All of her belongings remained inside, only Hope was gone. Then, when her body was found in the woods, the case transformed from a baffling disappearance into a chilling murder investigation. The question no longer was where she was, but who had taken her from that road and how they had done it, unseen, in broad daylight. The call comes in the afternoon, quiet and ordinary. December 26, 2011. Hope Melton is on the line with her grandmother, speaking from her car somewhere along a rural South Carolina road. Her voice sounds calm, nothing urgent. She says she is driving back to her home in Conway after Christmas with her family. It is the last confirmed conversation anyone will ever have with her. That fact is simple and uncontested. The time, the date, the call record. According to the investigation file, the phone disconnects normally. No distress signal, no raised voice, just an ending, and then silence. Hope Melton is 27 years old and lives alone. She has a job and stays in contact with her family. She isn't the type to vanish without a word. So, when she doesn't come home that night, no one worries at first. Travel can be delayed by long distances, dead phone batteries, or bad weather. However, as the hours turn into a full day, concern begins to grow. By December 27, family members begin calling again and again. The phone no longer rings, it goes straight to voicemail. That change is noted later by investigators as a key behavioral break. A device that had been active is now unreachable. Something has altered the pattern. Hope's family reports her missing to law enforcement. Officers take down details, her car, her route, the last call. They mark the timeline starting with that brief conversation. It becomes the anchor point. Everything before it is known. Everything after it is uncertain. Hope's car is a white Pontiac G6. According to traffic data and gas station receipts reviewed later, she had been traveling alone. No confirmed passengers, no known conflicts that day. No messages suggesting fear. The absence of warning becomes part of the mystery. In the days that follow, investigators begin retracing the route Hope likely took. They canvass gas stations. They ask for surveillance footage. They drive the same roads. The landscape is wide and quiet. Pine trees, long stretches without witnesses. A place where someone can vanish without noise. Everyone is waiting, hoping Hope Melton isn't harmed. Officially, she's still just a missing person. But with each passing hour, the situation looks more and more grim. The last call is not dramatic. That is what makes it unsettling. It offers no explanation, no clue. Just a timestamp and a voice that fades. If nothing was wrong when Hope Melton hung up the phone, then what happened in the minutes that followed? Hope Melton, before becoming a missing person case, led a predictable life. She lived in the small, familiar city of Conway, South Carolina, and worked as a waitress. People who knew her described her as reliable. She was punctual and responsive. When she disappeared, investigators found no clear warning signs. There were no recent violent breakups, sudden money gains, or reported threats to explain her disappearance. This lack of obvious risk factors only deepened the mystery. Hope is close to her family, especially her grandmother. Phone records later confirm regular contact. Nothing in the days leading up to December 26 suggests she is preparing to leave or disappear. She has plans, shifts to work, personal belongings left at home. According to the investigation file, there is no packed luggage, no farewell messages, and no withdrawals from her bank account after she vanishes. On Christmas Day, she visits relatives. It is unremarkable. No arguments reported. No witnesses describe tension. The next day, she gets into her car and drives back toward Conway. This is not a long journey. It is a route she knows. One she has driven before. The deviation happens quietly. She does not arrive. As police begin assembling her background, they find no indication she was seeking new connections. Her social circle is small. Familiar faces, co-workers, family. According to statements later reviewed in court, no one reports her expressing fear of a specific individual. That detail matters because early investigations often start closest to home: romantic partners, friends, family members. In Hope Melton's case, those avenues yield little. Alibis check out, timelines hold. There is no immediate suspect. The environment around her disappearance is deceptively calm. There are no witnesses calling in dramatic sightings. No screaming was reported along the roadway. No abandoned belongings were found in the first searches. Just a woman who did not return from a drive she should have completed easily. Investigators begin to understand that if something happened to Hope, it likely happened fast. A brief encounter, a narrow window, possibly with someone she did not know. That realization shifts the tone of the case. Randomness enters the equation, and with it, fear. Not just for Hope, but for anyone else traveling those roads. Investigators reconstruct Hope's final journey using fragments, gas station records, traffic flow. Surveillance cameras are mounted high above convenience store doors. According to the investigation file, Hope is captured on video at a gas station in Loris, South Carolina. The footage shows her alone. She appears composed. No visible distress. She pays. She leaves. This image matters. It confirms movement, direction, time. It narrows the window. From that point, the road stretches into rural quiet. Long distances, few cameras, sparse lighting, a place where chance encounters happen without record. Police map out where Hope should have gone next. They drive it themselves, mile by mile. The terrain offers little resistance to disappearance. Days after Hope is reported missing, her white Pontiac G6 is found abandoned in a remote area of Horry County. The location is not random. It is off the main road, secluded. According to law enforcement statements, the vehicle is locked. There are no obvious signs of a struggle visible from the outside. No shattered glass. No blood immediately apparent. Inside the vehicle, investigators find her personal items, purse, identification. According to police reports, nothing suggests she planned to leave the car voluntarily and walk away. Her phone is not recovered with the vehicle. The broken road is not just physical. It is narrative. The car's placement suggests control. Someone knew where to leave it. Someone wanted time. Law enforcement begins widening the search area. K-9 units, ground teams, helicopters. But the landscape resists clarity. Dense woods, swamps, private land. Each hour without a discovery compounds the pressure. At this stage, investigators face a critical uncertainty. Did Hope encounter someone she trusted, or someone she had never seen before? There are no defensive wounds documented yet, no forensic confirmation of violence, only absence. The case begins attracting public attention. Tips come in. Most lead nowhere. According to investigators, there is no credible sighting of Hope after the gas station footage. The road has taken her somewhere, but it refuses to say where. And with her car recovered and her trail gone cold, the investigation turns outward away from Hope's life and toward a stranger's. With Hope's car recovered and no sign of her nearby, investigators are forced to confront a hard truth early in the case. Whatever happened did not end where the vehicle was left. According to law enforcement statements, search teams comb the surrounding area for days. Dogs track scents that fade into nothing. Helicopters scan tree lines that reveal no movement. The land absorbs evidence easily. The fact is clear. Hope is not here. Police shift strategy. They stop looking only for Hope and start looking for patterns. They re-examine the car. They document every item inside. They log what is missing: her phone. Small details that might not matter alone, but together suggest interruption rather than choice. Family members wait nearby, watching the search expand and contract like a pulse. Each discovery that is not Hope feels like a loss repeated. Investigators canvass nearby businesses again. They pull additional surveillance footage. They request help from the public. According to the investigation file, one key breakthrough does not come from the woods but from a camera. A gas station surveillance review reveals a dark-colored SUV traveling through the same area around the same time Hope was last seen. The footage is grainy. Faces are unclear. But the vehicle stands out because it appears repeatedly. It is not confirmed at this stage whether the SUV interacted with Hope, but proximity alone is enough to elevate interest. Detectives start tracking similar vehicles registered in the area. It is slow work, hundreds of possibilities. Most were ruled out quickly. Others linger longer. According to police records, no immediate suspect emerges, but the idea of a random encounter solidifies. Meanwhile, the search for Hope continues beyond the road. Investigators receive tips about remote properties, abandoned buildings, rural paths. Each lead is checked, most go nowhere. Then, weeks later, the case reaches its most devastating discovery. Hope's remains are found in a wooded area of Horry County. The location is remote. According to official statements, the site is not easily accessible and suggests deliberate placement. An autopsy later confirms she died from a gunshot wound. The manner of death is ruled a homicide. At this point, the atmosphere turns heavy. The uncertainty ends. The question of where Hope is becomes replaced by why she was taken and who decided she would not return. With confirmation of murder, the investigation sharpens. Evidence is no longer speculative. It demands a name, and somewhere in the system vehicle records, surveillance footage, witness memory, that name already exists. Who was behind the wheel of that SUV? After Hope's remains are identified and the case is officially classified as homicide, detectives return to the evidence already collected. They look again at the surveillance footage, the dark SUV, the timing, the repeated appearances. According to the investigation file, the vehicle is not just passing through. It lingers within the same corridor Hope traveled. That pattern matters. Investigators begin matching vehicle descriptions against registration records in the region. Make, model, color, prior stops. This process takes weeks. Many names surface and disappear again. Most owners have verifiable alibis, work records, witnesses, receipts. One does not. The name is Nicholas Jermaine Miller. Miller is 22 years old at the time. He lives in the area. He owns a dark-colored SUV consistent with the one seen on camera. According to law enforcement statements, his movements on December 26 do not fully account for the window when Hope Melton vanished. Gaps appear. Small, but significant. Detectives bring him in for questioning. At first, Miller denies involvement. He acknowledges being in the area but claims he did not encounter Hope. This is not unusual. Many interviews end here. This one does not. According to court records, investigators confronted him with surveillance images and timeline inconsistencies. The pressure increases slowly. Then the story changes. Miller begins to admit contact. He tells investigators he encountered Hope while she was driving. According to his statement, he offered assistance. What happens next is reconstructed through confession, physical evidence, and later forensic confirmation. Prosecutors state that Miller abducted Hope, drove her to a remote location, and shot her. This is the first moment the case fully pivots. The disappearance is no longer ambiguous. It is targeted, violent, final. Investigators corroborate Miller's confession with physical evidence. Ballistics, location consistency, surveillance alignment. According to the prosecution, the account matches what is known and fills in what was missing. Miller is arrested and charged with murder and kidnapping. For Hope Melton's family, the emergence of a suspect does not bring relief. It brings clarity without comfort. The randomness they feared is confirmed. There was no long-standing connection, no warning signs, just proximity and opportunity. Once Nicholas Jermaine Miller is in custody, the investigation stops expanding and begins closing in on itself. Loose ends are tied. Statements are formalized. Evidence is logged for the court. According to prosecutors, Miller's confession becomes the spine of the case, but it is not treated as sufficient on its own. Every detail is tested against what can be proven. The facts align, the route, the timing, the location where Hope's body was found. Ballistic evidence confirms the cause of death as a gunshot wound. Investigators establish that Hope did not know Miller. There is no prior connection, no digital trail linking them before that day. The encounter is, by all available evidence, random. That randomness becomes central in the courtroom. Miller is charged with murder and kidnapping. The state initially seeks the death penalty. According to court records, the prosecution argues that Hope was abducted from her vehicle, transported against her will, and killed in a remote area to eliminate a witness. The defense does not dispute that Miller caused her death. Instead, it focuses on mitigation. Mental health enters the record. Defense attorneys present evidence that Miller had a history of intellectual disability and psychological limitations. Evaluations are conducted. Experts testify. According to the proceedings, these factors influence how the case moves forward, not in determining guilt, but in determining punishment. Hope Melton's family is present. They listen to details they did not ask to know. The confession removes uncertainty, but it replaces it with permanence. In 2013, Miller pleaded guilty. In exchange, the death penalty is taken off the table. The judge sentences him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There is no dramatic verdict moment, no jury deliberation climax. The outcome is procedural, final. According to public records, Miller does not appeal the conviction. The legal process ends as quietly as the crime began. For the system, this is a resolution. For Hope's family, it is an ending that does not feel complete. No sentence can restore what was taken. No explanation offered in court answers the deeper question of why Hope Melton crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong moment. The confession closes the case legally. Emotionally, it leaves space unfilled, because even with a name, a face, and a prison cell, the violence still feels uncontained, like something that could happen again. What remains after justice is delivered, but meaning is not. After the sentence is handed down, the courtroom empties. The case file closes. The system moves on. For Hope's family, time does not. According to public statements made in the years following the trial, her relatives describe a grief that arrives in waves. Not loud, not public, persistent. Hope is not a headline to them. She is a chair left empty. A phone number that no longer answers. A life that stopped mid-motion. There is no sense of triumph in the conviction. The man responsible will never walk free, but that certainty offers little relief. The violence was random. That fact lingers like an unresolved threat. If it could happen to Hope, it could happen to anyone. The atmosphere surrounding the case after sentencing is subdued. There are no rallies, no ongoing appeals, no media circus, just a quiet acknowledgement that a young woman's life ended violently on a road she had driven before without fear. Hope's family chooses remembrance over spectacle. According to interviews, they speak about her kindness, her reliability, the ordinariness of her plans. These details matter because they counter the way victims are often reduced to the moment of their death. Hope Melton is remembered for how she lived, not how she was taken. Law enforcement agencies reflect on the investigation as well. The case reinforces uncomfortable truths about rural vulnerability, long stretches of road, limited surveillance, the difficulty of responding quickly when a crime leaves no immediate trace. According to investigators, the successful resolution depended on persistence, video footage, and a suspect who eventually spoke. There is no warning sign that could have saved Hope Melton, no behavior she could have changed, no choice she could have made differently based on the evidence presented. That reality shifts responsibility away from the victim entirely, where it belongs. The aftermath is defined by absence, but also by resolve. Hope's name becomes part of local memory, not as a cautionary tale about mistakes, but as a reminder of how fragile safety can be. Her family carries forward without closure, but with clarity. They know what happened. They know who did it. What they cannot know is why this encounter occurred at all. And that unanswered question is where the case leaves the rest of us aware, unsettled, and forced to look at ordinary roads differently. What does justice mean when it arrives too late to matter to the person it was meant to protect? In the summer of 1990, in a sleepy Wisconsin town, Barrett Beck, an 18-year-old girl with musical dreams and aspirations, embarked on her first trip, a seemingly open door to the future. But just hours after leaving her family, Barrett disappeared in broad daylight. Her van was found with unusual markings, a torn red shirt, and an irreplaceable void in the hearts of her loved ones. When her body was found more than a month later, strangled and dumped in a deserted ditch, the small community was plunged into fear and obsession. Who extinguished that bright light? Who robbed a gentle, talented, and hopeful girl of her future. Why does a case that seems clear-cut become murky? When clues and suspects keep changing, and justice is delayed for decades. Barrett Beck was born on April 18, 1972, in Sturtevant, Wisconsin, a small town of about 7,000 people. She had a younger brother named Ben. Everyone remarked that Barrett was intelligent, talented, and had loved music since childhood. This passion grew even stronger as she turned 18. Barrett dreamed of pursuing a career in the creative field. In high school, her talent was evident. She played the violin, piano, and many other instruments, and sang very well. In the summer of 1989, she toured the United States with a Christian band. Besides, faith is an important part of her life. In high school, Barrett dated Curtis. He proposed, but she felt it was too early because she wanted to prioritize her studies and career. They agreed to take it slow, at least until they graduated from college. But they were still engaged and things were going well. Barrett had chosen a college and aimed to become financially independent from her parents. She was ambitious and didn't want the typical teen jobs. Even without a degree, she set her sights higher. Instead of working as a waitress or store clerk, she decided to seek a secretarial position at a construction company. She found the job by chance and felt confident because of her strong computer skills. She signed up for an interview and quickly impressed the manager. Despite not having any qualifications, she was hired on the condition that she attend a 3-day computer training course for new employees. This was a job with good salary and promising opportunity, so she decided to join. The training was in Appleton, about 150 kilometers away. Barrett asked her family for help, but no one could accompany her. Her mother was recovering from an injury. Her father was working and caring for her mother. Her brother was too young, and her fiancé, Curtis, couldn't get time off. Barrett saw this as a challenge rather than a setback. She didn't want to miss the chance to land a better job and improve her finances. So she decided to make the trip alone. It would be her first long-distance trip without someone accompanying her, and she was understandably nervous. Barrett prepared carefully for the seminar scheduled for July 17, 1990. She packed meticulously, made a list of essentials, and got her two-tone 1987 phone ready, including adding a roof rack. It was a popular, comfortable, and practical vehicle at the time. On July 17, she woke early, double-checked everything, said goodbye to her family, and drove to Curtis's house to see him before leaving town. After spending some time together, she set off. Her first stop was in Fond du Lac, about 100 kilometers away. She visited a large shopping center, bought cosmetics and travel items, including a whitening kit, and left the receipt in her van. This was around 11 o'clock a.m. Trouble began when she didn't arrive in Appleton at the scheduled time. The supervisor who had interviewed her and was expecting her at the training session noticed her absence. At first, she assumed Barrett was simply running late. Since cell phones were not common at the time, the supervisor could not contact Barrett directly, so she called the phone number Barrett had provided to her family. When the supervisor contacted Barrett's parents, they were confused and worried. They said they had seen her off early that morning and were waiting for her to call upon arrival. They assumed her silence was due to travel delays or a busy schedule, not realizing something more serious might have happened. Barrett's mother, Diane, was recovering from a snowmobile accident and couldn't go looking for her herself, but she was extremely worried and couldn't sit still. She called Barrett's boyfriend, Curtis, and learned that Barrett had left him some time ago. She then contacted all of Barrett's friends, but none knew where she was. Barrett's father decided to act. He put Diane in the car and drove to Appleton. There, he confirmed that Barrett had never arrived and hadn't checked into the hotel room he'd reserved for her. At that point, it was clear something was wrong. The parents knew that Barrett was a responsible person, took her job very seriously, and was on her way to an important event that had a significant impact on her future. They immediately started searching and called the police. The police do not use the excuse of waiting 24 hours. They recognized the seriousness of the situation and acted immediately. They organized multiple search parties. The number of volunteers quickly increased. Barrett's family was devastated and offered a substantial reward for information: $75,000. They hoped it would help bring her home alive. Instead, it triggered a flood of false tips. Rumors spread. Calls poured in, and investigators lost precious time following leads that went nowhere. On July 19, 2 days after the search began, Barrett's travel-converted van was found abandoned in a shopping center parking lot near the store where she had last been seen in Fond du Lac. Multiple witnesses said the van hadn't been there on July 17 or 18. Patrols who had driven by several times also reported seeing nothing unusual earlier. An inspection of the van revealed troubling details. The odometer showed more than 500 kilometers, even though the trip to Fond du Lac should have been around 100. Inside, officers found empty cigarette packs, numerous wrappers, and loose tobacco. Even though Barrett didn't smoke, about 70 items were collected from the vehicle, many of which the family could not identify and insisted did not belong to her. Barrett herself was missing, and there were no clues pointing to her whereabouts. There were, however, ominous signs. Her red shirt, the one she planned to wear to the seminar and considered a lucky charm, was found in the van. It was badly damaged. A large section had been torn away, and the missing piece was not found in or around the vehicle. Detectives began to fear that Barrett's parents might never see their daughter alive again. Despite a careful analysis of the evidence, the investigation stalled. Weeks passed with no breakthroughs. Then, 5 weeks after Barrett went missing, on August 22, a farmer near Waupun noticed something in a roadside ditch while driving his tractor to a nearby field. He stopped to investigate and discovered a severely decomposed human body. The August heat, intense sun, and insect activity had accelerated decomposition, and bones were beginning to show. He immediately called law enforcement. Police at the scene could learn little from the remains, so they ordered laboratory tests and brought in specialists. Entomologists studied the insects present and determined the victim had been dead for over a month. They also concluded the victim was a young woman, about 17 to 20 years old. This wasn't enough to identify her definitively, but it did narrow the search. Reviewing local missing person reports reduced the possibilities to a few names, including 18-year-old Barrett Beck. The victim showed multiple signs of strangulation on her neck. She was blindfolded, and there were no cuts or gunshot wounds. So the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be strangulation. Notably, the blindfold was a red rag. Forensic analysis confirmed the fabric matched a torn shirt found in Barrett's abandoned car. Combined with dental records, this evidence positively identified the body as 18 years old, Barrett Beck. When the police searching for her were notified, the case was officially reclassified as a homicide. The body was found nude except for socks, suggesting possible abuse. However, the state of decomposition made it impossible to confirm or disprove this hypothesis. No bodily fluids could be recovered. A search of the area near the body turned up some of Barrett's personal items, but several pieces of jewelry were missing. Her gold ring, a gift from her boyfriend, and her wristwatch were gone. The car was also missing a radio and radar detector. It was suspected the killer took them either to sell or to mislead investigators. After a thorough examination of the car, police found the ring under the floor mat on the driver's side. The rest of the items were still missing. Investigators compiled detailed descriptions of the missing items and canvassed pawn shops near where the body was found and in nearby suburbs. New leads emerged. No one recognized the items. The investigation pressed on. The geography complicated matters. The distance between the body and the abandoned van spanned tens of kilometers. Yet the van's high mileage suggested the killer drove much farther. No fingerprints were found on the steering wheel or gear shift. They had been wiped clean, indicating the killer deliberately removed traces. Other evidence left in the van might have contained the killer's DNA, but attempts to develop a profile failed. The samples were too limited for 1,990 seconds forensic methods. Eventually, the county sheriff took personal charge of the case. He was struck by the van's mileage and tried to reconstruct Barrett's movements. The van was bright and outfitted with extra equipment, making it theoretically noticeable, but the model was common. Moreover, traffic camera systems were hardly common at the time, so this line of investigation reached a dead end. The killer had the van for several days, drove it extensively, yet avoided police detection. Given the calculated behavior and method of murder, investigators considered whether the killer might have known Barrett. Hare's social circle, however, consisted of respectable people. Barrett was intelligent, law-abiding, and had no bad habits. The last person to see her alive was her boyfriend, Curtis, so he was scrutinized, more from a lack of other leads than real suspicion. Curtis immediately maintained his innocence, cooperated fully, and took a polygraph. He was quickly cleared. He had a strong alibi, having remained in the city and at work for the days following his meeting with Barrett. He could not have traveled the roughly 500 kilometers associated with her disappearance. Investigators then turned to men with criminal records living in Fond du Lac at the time. Their prime suspect became a local career criminal named Craig Rohn, known in criminal circles as Psycho, for his explosive temper and poor impulse control. The erratic young man had a lengthy criminal record. Craig drew law enforcement's attention because he was known for stealing cars and committing armed robberies. While Barrett wasn't physically assaulted, her car was used for an extended period. Around the time Barrett drove to a work event, Craig was seen in the Fond du Lac area. In the winter of 1991, detectives searched Craig's property under a warrant. From the start, Craig was uncooperative. He denied any involvement in the car theft and Barrett's death, refused to provide an alibi, and refused to take a polygraph test. Craig insisted the investigation was a setup and that he was being made a scapegoat. Still, searches of his home and car turned up no evidence linking him to the crimes. Despite this, detectives remained convinced of his guilt and focused on building a case against him. Police records show that Craig had serious behavioral problems from his teenage years, including running away from home, taking banned substances, and getting involved in the underworld. He dropped out of school, began stealing cars, and later added robberies to his offenses. Eventually, he received his first prison sentence. By the 1,990 seconds, Craig had a lengthy rap sheet and multiple stints in prison. He had a reputation as a career criminal who lived off illegal activity. People close to him believed he was capable of any crime, even murder. However, he had no known history of violence against women. Investigators still considered him dangerous and suspected he could kill without remorse, so they tried to link him to Barrett's disappearance. They believed the lack of evidence was due to his experience. He knew what to eliminate and how to avoid leaving traces. There were reasons for suspicion. Around the time of Barrett's abduction, Craig was staying at a motel near the Fond du Lac shopping center. Still, the evidence was circumstantial, and prosecutors couldn't charge him with Barrett's murder. A short time later, Craig was arrested on unrelated charges and sent to federal prison. This eased concerns about public safety while the investigation continued. A police informant, Tim Amundsen, then deepened suspicion by claiming Craig had confessed to the murder and even shown him Barrett's body. According to Tim, the body was left in the stolen van for nearly a day before Craig disposed of it outside the city. Yet the longer detectives worked the case, the clearer it became. There was no solid evidence tying Craig to the crime. They decided not to prosecute him in connection with Barrett's murder. That decision proved sound. Tim later recanted, admitting he had fabricated the story. Tim said he despised Craig and wanted him imprisoned long-term to prevent future harm. Tim's account was based on details from detectives and TV reports. He even failed a polygraph, confirming he was lying. Detectives then reviewed physical evidence and found 12 fingerprints on items in Barrett's car. The tests showed that they did not belong to Barrett or anyone close to her, and they did not match against police databases. Importantly, they did not match Craig either. Even after Craig was imprisoned on unrelated charges, investigators kept monitoring him. Despite no matching fingerprints, detectives have not given up on the theory that he killed Barrett. For years, there were no leads. Only in 2013 did the 1990 case come back to life, when a new cold case team was formed. A new detective joined the team and was given the first task: to collect all of Barrett Beck's documents and artifacts from the archives, digitize them, and review them. In February 2014, the investigation finally produced a breakthrough. An analyst at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab re-examined evidence from the van and discovered 9 previously unidentified fingerprints on 5 items, including a Burger King cup. In addition, police found a manual from the company where Barrett was planning to work, a teeth whitening kit she had purchased at a Fond du Lac supermarket, and cigarette and candy wrappers. All were sent for analysis and compared to a database. The initial hope was slim, but then the results came. All 9 fingerprints belonged to the same person in the database: Dennis Brantner, 61, a truck driver in Kenosha. Just before Barrett went missing, he repaired the stove in her family's home, thus linking him to the family and possibly to she. Detectives then reviewed his criminal history. His first arrest was in 1994 for assaulting, kidnapping, and beating his second wife. By then, many people had already noticed his volatile, manipulative behavior toward women. One co-worker even remembered Dennis saying he wanted to kidnap, abuse, and kill a woman. With this information, detectives searched his Kenosha home in 2014 with a search warrant, hoping to find missing items from Barrett's truck that the killer may have kept as trophies. Nothing from the van was found, which was not surprising given the time that had passed. However, investigators seized a computer, storage devices, a photo album, and several discs for analysis. Later that year, Dennis was brought in for questioning. He initially claimed he didn't know who Barrett was and insisted he was innocent. When informed that his fingerprints matched evidence from the van, his demeanor changed. He immediately said he hadn't killed her, suggesting he knew more than he admitted. Despite this, the first interview did not yield a confession, and he was released. His erratic behavior only deepened investigators' suspicions, but they still needed physical evidence. On March 27, 2015, Dennis was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Barrett Beck, drawing national attention. Barrett's family remained skeptical. For 25 years, his name had never been mentioned as a suspect. Barrett's family knew him, believed he was harmless and unlikely to attack Barrett. They also believed the police had the wrong man. Nevertheless, the trial began in June 2016. As the trial progressed, Dennis's parents and brother became increasingly convinced that he was guilty. The prosecution relied on fingerprints, the only direct evidence, and a slew of circumstantial evidence, including the suspect's cigarettes and cigarette butts found in the abandoned truck. They also presented witness statements and accounts of the man's disturbing past behavior, suggesting a pattern of cruelty and control toward women. The defense countered that the case was weak and largely circumstantial, emphasizing omitted details, most notably that some DNA samples from the truck did not match Dennis. The defense sought to introduce a previous suspect, Craig Crone, but the judge barred any mention of him during the hearing. Barrett's family and her boyfriend, Curtis, testified emotionally about their lives since her murder. Still, after 3 weeks of testimony, the jury could not reach a verdict, and a mistrial was declared. A retrial was ordered in January 2017. At the retrial, the evidence was largely unchanged, and both sides appeared to have a viable path to victory. On his attorney's advice, Dennis pleaded guilty to negligent homicide in February 2018, though he refused to provide full details to substantiate his account. At the time, Dennis was 64. Sentencing followed state laws from the 1,990 seconds, which capped the penalty at 10 years. He received the maximum on March 1, 2018. He had already served 3 years in pretrial detention, which counted toward his sentence, and he remained eligible for parole. In the best case, he could be released around age 75. He is currently incarcerated. After the sentencing, Barrett's family spoke to the press, expressing deep dissatisfaction. They noted that the original charges could have carried more than 5 years and felt the final sentence was too lenient. They said they had hoped this dangerous predator would spend the rest of his life in prison. As it stands, Dennis could eventually regain his freedom and, in their view, pose a risk to others. Moldova, December 2020. In the courtroom, silence reigns, broken only by the occasional click of camera shutters. On the defendant's bench sits 21-year-old Anna Lajkovic, a medical student. These are her first public hearings since her arrest, and her behavior shocks everyone present. She does not hide from the cameras. She reclines casually on the bench, cleaning her nails, smiling as if she were at a fashion shoot, rather than in court. The prosecutor read the indictment. Anna was convicted of the murder of her mother, Dr. Praskovia Lajkovic. She listens silently, her gaze vacant and indifferent. Moldova is a small Eastern European state, nestled between Ukraine and Romania. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the country has struggled for decades with poverty, political instability. Salaries are among the lowest in Europe. Thousands of citizens leave each year to work abroad, and corruption remains pervasive. In European rankings, Moldova consistently occupies the lowest positions, surpassed only by a few other post-Soviet states. Amid this general decline, the autonomous region of Gagauzia stands out. Located in the south of the country, roughly 60 miles from the capital, it is a territory with special status and its own parliament. The local population, mostly Gagauz, live modestly. Working in agriculture and small businesses, unemployment is higher here than in other regions. Yet, among ordinary homes, one can spot mansions built by those who tapped into local political or commercial structures. Anna was born in Comrat, the capital of Gagauzia, into a family whose status contrasted sharply with most others. The Lajkovic, Aladov family was among those in Moldova who lived by their own rules. Anna's father, Vasily Aladov, was a well-known entrepreneur and politician in Gagauzia, deeply involved in the region's public life. He owned several plots of land and companies whose income often did not match the figures in official reports. He faced repeated investigations on suspicion of financial irregularities and budget manipulation. Yet all cases were eventually closed without consequence. Vasily Aladov attempted twice to become governor of Gagauzia. Both campaigns ended in scandal. The first, disqualified due to insufficient verified signatures. The second, after the Ministry of Justice uncovered forged documents and signs of vote tampering. Despite his failed bids, he retained a position in local government and continued his business activities. Maintaining a reputation as a powerful figure, few dared to challenge. Anna's mother, Praskovia Lajkovic, came from a very different background. A physician by training, she graduated from medical school with honors, worked closely with clinics in Germany. Her career took her between Moldova and Germany, often traveling for assignments. She was regarded as a self-made woman, a model of intelligence and hard work. She provided her daughter with comfort, educational opportunities, and professional connections. The marriage between Vasily and Praskovia was short-lived, as their ambitions and outlooks clashed. After the divorce, Vasily quickly remarried, and Anna gained a half-brother from that union. Despite her parents' separation, Anna's financial situation remained unchanged. She was raised in a world of abundance, little oversight. In her world, money solved everything. Boundaries were non-existent. She was granted near-complete freedom, indulging in impulsive behavior and facing few consequences for school conflicts. Any criticism from teachers or school staff was often followed by those individuals losing their jobs at her parents' behest. Over time, this shaped a personality that didn't recognize limits. Someone who believed every problem could be resolved through connections or wealth. It was her father's political influence, her mother's career success, and the complete lack of structure that formed the basis of Anna Lykovich's worldview. From a young age, Anna lived in what could be described as a gilded cage, a world where everything revolved around her. Her parents provided everything they believed symbolized success: private schooling, international travel. However, they neglected core elements of upbringing, such as discipline, responsibility, and boundaries. Praskovia, constantly juggling business trips and her medical career, tried to compensate for her absences with gifts, attention whenever possible. Vasily, with his influence and access, never denied Anna anything. Whatever she wanted, a new item, a vacation, a spot in an elite event, was granted without discussion. No was not part of their vocabulary. Household staff never stayed long. According to people familiar with the family, nannies and helpers frequently faced rude behavior and temperamental demands. This same pattern played out at school. When teachers offered criticism, Anna responded aggressively, and her parents intervened to resolve matters with the administration. Over time, she absorbed a simple lesson. When things didn't go her way, it was someone else's fault. Psychologists describe this kind of upbringing as a breeding ground for narcissistic traits. A young person raised in such an environment can grow up believing their wants matter more than anything else. In Anna's case, that belief was only reinforced by her family's wealth and influence. In a world where money replaced authority, boundaries eventually disappeared altogether. Former classmates recalled that Anna always carried herself as someone special. She craved the spotlight, couldn't handle criticism, and believed she deserved to be treated differently. Even minor slights were taken as personal offenses, and genuine emotional connection seemed to be missing entirely. People were, to her, more like tools for getting what she wanted. By the time she reached her teenage years, this behavior pattern was firmly established. Empathy never took root because neither her family nor her surroundings modeled it. Over time, Anna developed a personality marked by confidence, isolation, and a lack of internal limits. She didn't grasp the line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. By the time Anna entered college, she had a clear understanding of her advantages, on her appearance, her financial freedom, and a life largely free from rules. After finishing high school, she enrolled in medical school at a university in Russia. She performed well academically, but her interest in medicine ran shallow. For her, studying medicine wasn't about helping others. It was about building an image. It aligned with her desire for status, something she could showcase publicly. Alongside school, she began experimenting with modeling. At first, it was small gigs, photo shoots for local agencies, minor runway events, and commercials. Success in that world deepened her sense of being exceptional. She started attending more social events, networking with young entrepreneurs and influencers. Around this time, she launched her Instagram account, which quickly became her primary tool for self-promotion. Her feed was carefully curated: designer outfits, European vacations, upscale restaurants, exclusive parties, luxurious hotel stays, and a depiction of unconstrained campus life. Each post projected the image of a budding European influencer, a young woman who combined brains, beauty, and independence. By 2020, she had over 10,000 followers, a substantial audience in Moldova, a country with just over 2 million people. The more Anna flaunted her polished lifestyle, the more she craved validation. Likes and comments became a measure of her worth. When she is not given regular attention, she feels anxious, irritable. Eventually, her need for quick gratification spilled beyond social media. It began with alcohol at parties and events, then escalated to stronger substances. The crowd she spent time with didn't see this as a problem. Using illegal substances was viewed as part of the European leisure scene. Outwardly, Anna still looked poised and polished, but mentally, she was beginning to unravel. Her parents tried to intervene. Praskovia hired a therapist, hoping regular sessions would help stabilize her daughter. However, therapy didn't work. Anna saw it as an attempt to control her and refused to engage in meaningful conversations about her behavior. By that point, a growing emotional distance had formed between them. Over time, Anna's reliance on substances became ingrained in her persona. She could hide the consequences in front of a camera, but those close to her began to notice the changes: dramatic mood swings, sleepless nights, and emotional outbursts. What remained of her former success was merely a shell. Online, she still appeared confident and carefree, but offline, she was losing touch with herself and with the world she once believed she controlled. In mid-2020, Anna returned from Russia to Moldova. Praskovia hoped that being back home would help her daughter recover. They began living together again in Comrat, in the house that used to feel empty due to Praskovia's frequent business trips. At first, things seemed calm. Praskovia focused on rebuilding trust, avoided arguments, and continued paying for psychological sessions. Anna agreed to attend, but took none of it seriously. FDs. For her, these visits were just something to get through, not a genuine effort to change. It didn't take long for her mother to realize that the calm exterior masked irritation and aggression. Praskovia explained her daughter's behavior as stress, burnout, but the signs of dependency were becoming impossible to ignore. Late-night activity, constant phone calls to friends, emotional instability. On several occasions, she found pills and empty medication packaging in Anna's room, none of which had been prescribed. Then, in the fall of 2020, the first serious crisis hit. Anna was found unconscious in her room after what doctors later confirmed was an overdose. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, caused by the use of banned substances. That was the moment Praskovia realized she couldn't handle this alone anymore. After her daughter was discharged, she insisted on full-time supervision and suggested a stay at a rehabilitation center. Anna flatly refused. She told her mother it was a one-time mistake and swore it wouldn't happen again. In an effort to maintain some peace, Praskovia backed off, opting instead for home care and close medical monitoring. For a short while, it seemed like things were improving. Anna was spending more time at home, focusing on her studies, and appeared calmer. But that calm didn't last. Within weeks, the tension returned. Their relationship grew increasingly strained. Any mention of treatment would trigger explosive reactions from Anna. Praskovia tried a softer approach, but every conversation ended in conflict. The house, once a symbol of stability, turned into a battleground of silent hostility. By the end of the year, the atmosphere had become unbearable. Praskovia contacted doctors, researched clinics, and began preparing paperwork for involuntary treatment. It was a last resort. She had no other option. In the final weeks leading up to the tragedy, the tension inside the house had reached a breaking point. Two women under the same roof, living in what felt like two separate realities. A mother desperately trying to save her daughter, and a daughter unwilling, orunable, to admit she needed help. December 4, 2020. Praskovia had just returned from Germany, where she'd spent several days at a professional conference. Friends later said she looked tired but composed and planned to spend the weekend at home with her daughter. That evening, around 7 p.m., she arrived at the house she and Anna shared. The housekeeper wasn't there that night. Praskovia had made a firm decision. After repeated failed attempts to convince Anna to enter treatment willingly, she had gathered all the necessary paperwork and filled out the referral forms for a private clinic. At first, the conversation was calm. Praskovia explained why treatment was necessary, framing it as a chance for Anna to regain control of her life. Anna responded first with indifference, then with irritation. When her mother revealed that everything had already been arranged, that doctors were expecting them the next morning, the tension exploded into shouting. According to investigators, Anna accused her mother of controlling her, interfering, and trying to humiliate her. Praskovia tried to de-escalate the situation, but emotions had gone too far. Around 8 p.m., there was a sudden outburst of aggression. Anna went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. She took a knife and stabbed her mother in the chest multiple times. While Praskovia was left bleeding on the floor, Anna is said to have cut out her still beating heart. What followed happened in a matter of minutes. Afterward, Anna went to the bathroom. She carefully cleaned herself, changed clothes, and left the house. Investigation documents noted that she showed no visible signs of panic and kept her phone, personal documents with her. Anna went to her boyfriend's nearby apartment. According to him, she walked in calmly and said, "It's over. She's not in the way anymore." At first, he thought it was just a dramatic way of describing a fight. But as Anna shared more details, laughing almost jokingly, he began to realize it might be more serious. When he asked her directly if she was telling the truth, she just shrugged and laughed. Late that night, they left his apartment, bought champagne, and went out to a restaurant. Witnesses said Anna showed no signs of stress. She looked relaxed, even carefree. After dinner, she stayed the night at his place. The next morning, while Anna was still asleep, her boyfriend decided to check for himself. He went to the Lajkovic home. The front door was unlocked, and the house was silent. Inside the house, he was horrified to discover Praskovia's body. Immediately, he called emergency services. Law enforcement arrived shortly after. Officers documented the scene and quickly identified Anna as a person of interest. Neighbors reported hearing, shouting the night before, but said they hadn't intervened, assuming it was a typical family argument. After receiving a report from Anna's boyfriend, a search for the suspect was launched. Authorities eventually located her at a friend's home in a nearby district. During the arrest, she didn't resist. She was calm and detached. After her arrest, Anna was taken to the Comrat Police Department holding facility. Detectives pieced together a clear timeline of her actions after the incident and determined that she had composure, showing no visible panic. During her first interrogation, Anna denied any wrongdoing and appeared confident. Her answers were brief, often accompanied by a faint smile. One investigator later said it seemed as if she didn't take any of it seriously. That impression would later be confirmed by a psychological evaluation. Experts observed a lack of emotional response to the gravity of the situation, something that diverged sharply from what would be expected in a high-stress event. The assessment described Anna as having strong narcissistic tendencies, a pattern of manipulative behavior, and a flair for the dramatic. She showed no signs of remorse or guilt. Meanwhile, witness statements were being gathered. Neighbors reported hearing shouting on the night of December 4000, Idov, but didn't intervene, thinking it was just another argument. Friends, acquaintances confirmed that tensions between Anna and her mother had escalated in recent months, mostly over the subject of treatment. One university lecturer shared that, shortly before returning to Moldova, Anna had seemed unstable and often spoke about feeling pressured by her family. Anna's father, Vasily Aladov, did not speak publicly. However, relatives from his side of the family claimed they did not believe she was responsible, suggesting that she may have experienced a psychological breakdown. The story of a medical student accused of committing a crime against her physician mother spread rapidly through regional and international news. Final hearings were held in Chisinau in December 2021. By then, the investigation had lasted nearly a year. Dozens of interviews had been conducted, independent evaluations ordered, and psychiatric records reviewed. The trial itself was closed to the public, but the main findings were later confirmed by official sources. According to a psychiatric evaluation, at the time of the incident, Anna was in a psychological state that prevented her from fully understanding the nature and consequences of her actions. The assessment revealed signs of a severe mental disorder, exacerbated by psychoactive substances and emotional instability. The prosecution pushed for the maximum sentence, insisting Anna was fully responsible for her actions. They pointed to the sequence of events following the crime: cleaning herself, changing clothes, and attempting to flee, as evidence of intent and awareness. However, the defense submitted additional medical reports and expert testimony, all reinforcing the argument that Anna had lost control of her behavior. After reviewing both sides, the court accepted the findings of the psychiatric experts. Anna Lajkovic was ruled not criminally responsible and was ordered to undergo compulsory treatment at a high-security psychiatric facility. The sentence was open-ended. Her release would only be possible if a medical board determined she had shown consistent, verifiable improvement. Public reaction to the verdict was deeply divided. Some in Gagosiu and Chisinau considered it a just outcome, while others saw it as preferential treatment, possibly influenced by family connections. Journalists noted that in Moldova, where life sentences for women are not legally permitted, this verdict amounted to indefinite institutionalization. After the court's decision was announced, prosecutors filed an appeal, but the ruling was upheld. Anna's father declined to speak publicly. Her maternal relatives expressed hope that she would receive the care she needed and never return to her former life. Ellen Ellywake grew up in the quiet suburb of West Chester, Ohio, admired for her kindness and outgoing personality. At 23, she had completed her studies, begun shaping a promising future. Friends remembered a creative soul who loved art. Nature walks brought her joy, and she often captured striking images of local landscapes to share online. Her family was the most important thing in her life. Her parents encouraged all her ambitions. Her younger sister looked up to her as a role model. Ellie was also very active in her community, participating in charity events and offering help whenever she could. Yet behind her bright smile hid a troubling reality. For nearly a year, Ellie faced relentless harassment from Michael Strauss, a man she knew through local circles. He pushed for a connection she never wanted, sending uncomfortable messages, showing up at places she visited, reacting with hostility whenever she kept her distance. Ellie tried to continue living as usual, hoping the behavior would eventually fade. On July 29, 2018, she met a friend in the morning, then spent time outdoors near her home. Around 4:00 p.m., she was spotted walking toward her neighborhood. After that moment, she vanished. Her phone went silent, prompting immediate concern. When evening came with no sign of her return, her family launched a frantic search. Calls went out to relatives, friends, neighbors. Posts appeared online. Every familiar place was checked. Yet not a single clue emerged. That night, her parents filed a missing person report. From that moment, a case began that would shake West Chester's close-knit community and later become one of the region's most disturbing investigations. Police initiated their work by interviewing those closest to Ellie. They learned she had made no plans to leave town or meet anyone unexpected. Search teams quickly searched parks, wooded trails, and abandoned areas, all places Ellie liked to go. Volunteers helped officers look everywhere. But days went by, and they found nothing. The investigation turned to potential threats, and Michael Strauss's name kept coming up. People close to Ellie said he had been stalking her for months, sending threatening messages, and acting hostile. When questioned, Strauss denied everything, claiming he hadn't seen her that day. But detectives didn't believe him. A week into the investigation, police examined security camera footage from multiple locations. One video showed Ellie on a trail. Shortly after, a man who looked like Strauss walked the same trail. This was the first significant discovery in the case. Public attention intensified. Posters of Ellie appeared throughout town. Social media spread updates at lightning speed. Local stations reported daily developments. The community hoped for her safe return. Yet each silent day deepened the fear. 2 weeks after Ellie disappeared, tragedy struck. A farmer working near a wooded field discovered human remains. Authorities later confirmed the worst. The body belonged to Ellie Wake, hidden in dense undergrowth, roughly 10 kilometers from the place she was last seen. At the site, police uncovered several critical clues: fragments of clothing, traces of disturbed soil, plus subtle signs of a struggle. Identification moved quickly thanks to personal belongings discovered near the body. DNA testing soon confirmed the remains were Ellie's. Her family received the news as soon as the process concluded. The recovery of Ellie Wake's remains sent shockwaves through the community. Westchester, once viewed as a safe, quiet town, now carried an atmosphere of grief mixed with unease. For Ellie's family, the confirmation shattered the final bit of hope they had held during the long, agonizing search. Police immediately sealed off the field where her body had been found to protect every potential piece of evidence. Forensic specialists studied the ground inch by inch, documenting fabric remnants, possible footprints, stray fibers, plus unusual soil patterns. These details formed the first pieces of a forensic timeline. The autopsy provided detectives with essential insight. Ellie's cause of death was asphyxiation, with distinct marks on her neck suggesting pressure from a belt or similar object. Scratches and bruises revealed a violent struggle during her final moments. Evidence from the scene raised troubling questions. Certain fabric pieces did not belong to Ellie, hinting at another presence during the crime. A long strand of dark hair discovered on her body was sent for DNA testing with hopes of identifying a suspect. Throughout the investigation, Michael Strauss remained the primary focus. During interrogation, he again denied involvement, claiming he had stayed home on the day she disappeared. His alibi, however, lacked solid confirmation. Surveillance footage shows a man resembling Strauss following Ellie in the park, adding to suspicion. A breakthrough arrived when DNA from the hair recovered at the scene matched Strauss. The match gave investigators a powerful lead, though not enough for an immediate arrest. Surveillance on him intensified as detectives waited for additional evidence or missteps that could tie him conclusively to the murder. At this point, the investigation narrowed its focus on building a solid case against Strauss. Detectives reconstructed his movements on the day of Ellie's disappearance. Cellular data showed his phone had been near the trail where she was last seen, later shifting toward the wooded area where her body was discovered. Forensic experts also examined physical evidence. Fibers on Ellie's clothing matched the upholstery of Strauss's car seats. Soil particles on his vehicle's floor mats matched the soil in the forested field where Ellie's body had been hidden. Despite this growing body of circumstantial evidence, detectives pressed for stronger proof. A search warrant for Strauss's home uncovered disturbing items: notebooks containing entries about Ellie, photographs taken without her knowledge, plus a belt with a damaged buckle. Forensic analysis later linked this belt to the marks found on her neck, identifying it as the probable murder weapon. Michael Strauss was arrested on August 24, 2018. The arrest marked a major turning point in the case. Many residents felt a sense of relief. During his first questioning, Strauss seemed calm but avoided direct answers and consistently denied being involved. He claimed someone had changed the evidence to make him look guilty. Regardless of his claims, the investigation focused more and more on him. A major turning point happened when detectives looked at his computer and phone. They found he had been searching for disturbing things for months, like how to hide a body, information on how bodies decay, and in-depth studies of famous murder cases. His email history revealed dozens of unsent messages addressed to Ellie. Some expressed desperation for a meeting. Others contained threats or obsessive comments. These digital traces became the backbone of the formal charges against Michael Strauss. Prosecutors moved forward with accusations of kidnapping, stalking, plus premeditated murder. His attorney argued that no direct evidence linked him to the act of killing itself, yet the judge ruled that he would remain in custody while awaiting trial. Local media covered every development, fueling heated discussions throughout the community. Many residents believed in Strauss's guilt, while others doubted the reliability of the evidence. For Ellie's family, his arrest offered the first real step toward justice, though they knew the trial ahead would be long and painful. The trial of Michael Strauss began in October 2019, immediately drawing widespread public attention. The courtroom filled with journalists, community members, plus friends of Ellie Wake. Her family appeared at every session, determined to witness each detail. To them, the proceedings represented both a pursuit of justice and a final effort to honor Ellie's dignity. The prosecution opened with a strong case built on substantial evidence. Cell phone records placed Strauss near several locations tied directly to Ellie's disappearance as well as her death. Forensic specialists outlined their findings: fibers, soil traces, microscopic particles collected from Michael's car matched samples from the crime scene almost perfectly. Prosecutors also emphasized Michael's obsessive fixation on Ellie. Emails and messages retrieved from his devices were read aloud. One message, sent shortly before Ellie vanished, delivered a chilling warning: "If you don't respond, I'll come myself. Then you'll understand what I'm capable of." This message became a centerpiece of the argument for premeditation. Witnesses for the prosecution included close friends who described Ellie's fear of Strauss. Forensic experts strengthened the narrative by connecting physical evidence to him. Neighbors testified as well, recalling his suspicious behavior on the day Ellie disappeared. Several remembered seeing him return home visibly shaken, followed by meticulous cleaning of his car the next morning. The defense attempted to undermine the prosecution's case by highlighting gaps and questioning the strength of circumstantial evidence. Strauss's attorney argued that fibers or soil might have transferred through routine contact, while cell phone location data merely showed proximity, not guilt. The lack of eyewitnesses further became a key point in the defense strategy. The turning point arrived with presentation of the DNA findings. Genetic tests on the hair recovered near Ellie's body, along with skin cells found on the belt used to strangle her, conclusively matched Michael Strauss. His attorney challenged the lab's procedures, suggesting potential contamination. But the court dismissed these claims due to lack of credible support. Defense witnesses failed to shift the jury's perspective. Strauss chose not to testify, invoking his Fifth Amendment right. The decision sparked mixed reactions. Prosecutors portrayed it as silent acknowledgement of guilt, whereas the defense insisted it was a tactical choice to avoid risks during cross-examination. The trial lasted 6 weeks. More than 20 witnesses testified, supported by extensive forensic evidence, digital records, plus expert analysis. Closing arguments were emotionally charged. The prosecution demanded the harshest possible sentence, emphasizing the brutality and calculated nature of the crime. The defense maintained that reasonable doubt still existed. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous decision. Michael Strauss was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, plus stalking. The judge then scheduled a sentencing hearing. Ellie Wake's family waited for justice. fully aware that no sentence could ever restore their daughter's life. The people of Westchester, still shaken by the horrific crime that disrupted their peaceful town, hoped for a punishment severe enough to reflect the enormity of the act while offering some measure of closure. During the sentencing hearing, the prosecution sought the harshest outcome: life imprisonment without parole. The prosecutor highlighted the calculated nature of Michael Strauss's actions, the months of fear he imposed on Ellie through relentless stalking, plus the permanent void left in her family's lives. Ellie had been robbed of her chance to grow, dream, pursue happiness. Michael Strauss was sentenced on April 17, 2019, in Butler County District Court in Hamilton. He received a prison sentence of 15 years to life for Ellie Weich's murder, 18 months for stalking, and 12 months for abuse of a corpse. The sentences will run consecutively. The courtroom response was overwhelming. Ellie's family wept, clinging to each other as they struggled through a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Justice had been served, yet their loss remained immeasurable. Strauss kept an expressionless face, the same detached demeanor he maintained throughout the trial. The community welcomed the verdict. Messages supporting the Wake family spread across social media, praising investigators as well as the prosecution team. Still, the case ignited broader conversations about how such a tragedy might have been prevented. Ellie's story exposed the far-reaching impact of stalking, prompting many to question weaknesses in the system meant to protect victims. Determined to create meaningful change, Ellie's family launched a campaign advocating reforms to Ohio's laws. They pushed for stronger penalties for stalking, improved protections for victims, plus quicker access to restraining orders. Months after the trial ended, Ohio passed a legislative amendment known as Ellie's Law. The measure increased penalties for stalking and expanded victims' rights to pursue legal safeguards. For Ellie's family, the law represented a step toward preventing similar tragedies. Michael Strauss's fate was sealed, yet Ellie's legacy continued to resonate. Her case stood as a powerful reminder to Westchester residents, a warning about the dangers of unchecked fixation, and a testament to the strength of a community united for safety and justice. After the trial, Ellie's family and friends devoted themselves to preserving her memory through projects centered on awareness and prevention. They hope to honor her life while helping others who faced similar threats. In June 2020, 1 year after her disappearance, a memorial was installed in the park where she was last seen. A small marble plaque displayed her portrait with the inscription, "In memory of a radiant soul who will forever remain in our hearts, may her story inspire us to protect one another." Visitors often decorated the site with flowers or candles, creating a place of quiet reflection. Her family also established the Ellie Weich Memorial Fund, which supports victims of stalking. The foundation offered legal guidance, counseling services, plus financial assistance. Funding came from annual community events such as marathons, auctions, or benefit concerts. At the college where Ellie studied, a scholarship for graphic design students was established in her name. It supported talented artists who shared Ellie's passion for creativity. Each year, during the award ceremony, Ellie's parents delivered heartfelt speeches about her dreams and the lasting influence she left behind. Ellie's story spread far beyond her hometown. Her name became linked with new efforts to combat stalking nationwide. Documentaries, podcasts, plus written features chronicled her case, encouraging the public to recognize early warning signs of danger and seek help before it was too late. Years after the tragedy, the Wake family slowly found the strength to move forward while keeping Ellie's memory alive. They remembered her as a warm, vibrant young woman whose presence uplifted those around her. Their advocacy efforts helped raise public awareness about stalking, along with the urgent need to support individuals facing similar threats. Ellie's story became a powerful reminder of how one life can leave a lasting imprint on the world. Her memory survives in the hearts of those who loved her, in the laws now protecting countless others, plus in every person whose sense of security or hope has been renewed because of her legacy. On the morning of November 24, 1987, on the deserted Parson Creek Road in Skagit County, Washington, a truck driver stopped on the side of the road and discovered a scene that stunned him. Amidst the rotting leaves and mud, the body of a young woman lay discarded like trash. Clothes disheveled, hands bound with duct tape, a bullet through her head. 2 days later, more than 60 miles away, under the high bridge in Snohomish County, police were shocked to find the body of a young man strangled with rope. Covered with an old blanket, there were no cameras, no witnesses, just a few strands of hair, traces of semen, and a torn ferry ticket in the abandoned van in Bellingham. For more than 3 decades, police had followed every lead, but nothing had come up. It wasn't until DNA genealogy technology was used to build a family tree from the killer's DNA that a name suddenly emerged: William Earl Talbot. The case not only ended a tragedy, but also ushered in a new era of justice, where time may fade, but DNA never forgets. Tanya van Cuylenborg was born on March 7, 1969, in Victoria, Canada. She grew up with loving parents and was very close to her older brother. From a young age, she adored animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. She also wanted to travel the world. A high school trip to Paris with her best friend strengthened that dream. At 18, shortly before graduating, Tanya met Jay Cook, who was 2 years older and had attended the same school. They were introduced by a mutual friend after Jay graduated and soon began dating. Although Tanya still hoped to study veterinary medicine, she chose to delay college to travel. After graduation, she worked at a cafe to save money and also took a job walking dogs. Jay didn't go to college either. He worked with his father, who ran a small heating installation business. In November 1987, Jay's father received an order, but couldn't find a key part locally. The nearest supplier was in Seattle, Washington. Instead of placing a delivery order, he wanted to go buy it himself for speed and lower cost. But since he was busy, he asked Jay to go in his place. Jay agreed and invited Tanya to come along, hoping the trip would bond them. They had been dating for about 6 months, and Tanya happily accepted. The plan was simple: leave Victoria in the morning, arrive in Seattle by evening, and return the next day. Jay's father lent them his van and gave money for a hotel, but Jay and Tanya decided to save the hotel money and sleep in the van. He also gave Jay a $700 check for the part and additional cash for expenses. Even though Seattle isn't far from Victoria, the route required 2 ferries, one to enter the U.S. and another to cross the bay near Seattle. On the morning of November 18, they left for the first ferry to Port Angeles. Their parents expected them home the following afternoon, but Tanya and Jay never returned. Knowing the ferry schedule, the 2 families were worried because they should have arrived home by now, but they were nowhere to be found. At first, the parents considered that they might have stopped to sightsee and missed the ferry. As more time passed with no word, Tanya's parents called Jay's parents. By afternoon, both families feared something was wrong. They still hoped Tanya and Jay were simply extending their trip, but their worries grew. When they still had not returned by the end of the day, their parents went to the police the next morning to report them missing. The police declined to launch a search, noting that Tanya was 18 and Jay was 20, and there was no evidence of foul play. They suggested waiting a few more days, assuming Tanya and Jay left on their own. The families were frustrated and disagreed, but the police refused to act. By then, both families were certain Tanya and Jay wouldn't have extended the trip without calling. Jay had an important task for his father's business and wasn't irresponsible. And if plans had changed, they could have called from any of the many payphones along the route. Tanya's father decided to search on his own. He and Jay's parents confirmed that Jay had never gone to pick up the parts in Seattle. The supplier said they had waited for several hours, but no one showed up. Tanya's father drove the entire route to Seattle, but found no trace of Tanya, Jay, or their truck. Not giving up, he hired a private helicopter to fly along their planned route. However, the aerial search was also hopeless because the area was mostly forested, making it difficult to observe. He then made missing person flyers and spent several days posting them around Seattle. The families pressed relentlessly for action, and the local police finally took the case more seriously, though they still suspected Tanya and Jay were simply off together and would return. Therefore, they only contacted the Seattle police, provided a description of the truck and information about Tanya and Jay, and asked to be notified if there were any findings. On November 24, 5 days after the disappearance, a man walking near a wooded embankment about 90 miles north of Seattle saw something unusual under a tree. On closer inspection, he realized it was a body and called police. Officers found the body of a young woman. Her clothing was partially missing. Her hands were bound, and she had a gunshot wound to the head. The lack of blood at the scene indicated she had been killed elsewhere. The victim had no identification, so police checked it against a list of missing women in the area. They quickly found the victim matched Tanya van Cuylenborg's description and contacted her father. He went to the morgue and confirmed it was his daughter. Police learned that Tanya had gone on a trip with her boyfriend, Jay, who was still missing. Jay's truck was also missing, prompting them to consider his involvement. The Jay family refuted this, saying he is gentle, loves Tanya, has never been aggressive, does not own a gun, and would also find it difficult to obtain one. While police were searching for Jay, they received another call. A bartender in Bellingham, about 18 miles from where the body was found, picked up a wallet and keys on the road. The wallet contained identification in the name of Tanya van Cuylenborg. At first, he didn't call the police, but instead took the items back to the bar, thinking the owner would come looking for them. But after seeing the news of Tanya's murder on TV, he immediately called 911. The police searched the area around the bar and found, under the back porch, several plastic zip ties identical to the kind used to bind Tanya's hands, along with rubber gloves and a partially used box of ammunition. Nearby, an officer spotted a van. It was the same vehicle Tanya and Jay had been driving. Inside the car was a mess. Belongings were scattered and damaged. But there were also a few important clues. Numerous receipts that help reconstruct Tanya and Jay's journey, and a ferry ticket indicating they had reached Seattle, where something terrible may have happened. Detectives also noticed that the camera Tanya had been carrying was missing. Since it was not at the scene of the body, they suspected the killer had taken it. The van's interior was stained with blood, which forensic teams collected for testing. Although DNA analysis was still new, a Seattle lab examined the samples and identified 3 profiles: Tanya's, Jay's, and an unknown male's. With no national DNA database at the time, the third profile could not be matched. This evidence led detectives to conclude Jay was likely not the killer. The pressing questions became, was Jay still alive? And where was he? Sadly, the answer emerged quickly. On November 26, a group of friends hunting a few dozen miles from Seattle discovered a body in the bushes near a small river bridge and alerted police. The victim was quickly identified as Jay Cook. He had multiple bruises, and the apparent cause of death was strangulation. Because of the crime's brutality, detectives considered that the killer might have known Jay and acted out of a personal motive. They also believe Jay was killed first. Since his body was found closer to Seattle, the killer then likely drove Tanya in the van toward the Canadian border, murdered her, and left her in a wooded area. Forensic experts found semen on Tanya, and DNA analysis matched blood found in the van, indicating the same man was responsible. However, his identity remained unknown. Investigators attempted to trace Tanya and Jay's movements using receipts found in the car to establish a timeline. After taking the ferry from Victoria to Port Angeles, Tanya and Jay bought food at a store. They then headed towards Seattle. But Jay appears to have missed the fastest route. This was supported by a receipt from a store in Hoodsport and a clerk's testimony. The clerk remembered a young couple matching their description who asked for directions to the ferry. The clerk also noted a suspicious detail. A man in a brown raincoat seemed to be following them. He entered the store right after them and left right after them, although she didn't see where he went. A later receipt placed Tanya and Jay at a store in the town of Allen. After that, they reached the ferry near Seattle and bought a ticket. Several witnesses saw them in that area, but their movements afterward could not be traced. Police reviewed individuals in Seattle with violent crime histories, but found no viable suspects. Despite having the killer's DNA, investigators had no way to identify him. They suspected he had offended before. Given the sophistication of the crime, detectives believe the killer may have been stalking Tanya and Jay for some time and kidnapped them when they arrived in Seattle. He might have gained their trust by asking for a ride and later used a gun to control them. Detectives also suspect he deliberately left Tanya's belongings and rubber gloves in plain sight to taunt police, implying that fingerprints would be useless because he was wearing gloves. Several fingerprints found in the van did not belong to Tanya or Jay, but investigators doubted they were the killers for the same reason. The prints did not match any database entries and did not advance the case. For weeks, detectives searched for leads and checked suspects without success. Then, in December, about a month after the murders, something unexpected happened. Tanya's and Jay's families began receiving letters and postcards from someone claiming to be the killer. The sender confessed, mocked the families, and bragged that he would never be caught. Investigators tried to trace the source, but that was extremely difficult at the time. They could only determine the city the letter was sent from, but that wasn't enough to identify the culprit. The letters kept coming, often on holidays, apparently to inflict maximum pain. They were mailed from multiple cities and states, suggesting the sender traveled frequently. Still, investigators were not certain the writer was the killer. In high-profile cases, hoax letters from people pretending to be the perpetrator are unfortunately common. Since then, the case saw little progress for years. Detectives continued pursuing suspects and considered the possibility of a serial killer. This idea stemmed from two other couples being abducted in the same region around that time. Though police considered the connections weak, over the following years, several serial killers were arrested in the area, but none were tied to the murders of Tanya and Jay. In 2003, the case was reopened, and the perpetrator's DNA was entered into the FBI database. No matches were found. Investigators still believed the killer likely had a lengthy criminal history, but had either avoided arrest or been arrested before mandatory DNA collection. In 2010, the case was featured on a popular national TV show, generating many new tips. Someone called and said they knew who sent the letter to Tanya and Jay's family. This lead pointed to a 78-year-old Seattle man. Investigations revealed that he had traveled across the United States, and the locations he visited matched the locations where the letters were sent. Detectives concluded he had written the letters, but had no role in the murders. The man showed clear signs of severe mental illness, and his DNA did not match the blood and semen from the crime scenes. This confirmed the letters were from an unrelated individual, not the killer. The case remained cold for several more years. In 2018, detectives learned about Parabon, a company that creates composite sketches from DNA. With no other leads, they tried this approach. Parabon produced age-progressed sketches of the killer, which police released to the media. New useful tips emerged. Investigators then turned to genetic genealogy. Parabon uploaded the killer's DNA to a public database to search for distant relatives. They quickly identified a person who could be the suspect's second cousin and traced the genealogy. The goal is to find a man who lived in Seattle or the surrounding area in 1987, matching the age and other criteria. With the cousin's help, they identified a suspect, 55 years old, William Earl Talbot, a truck driver living in a Seattle suburb. Before making an arrest, police needed to confirm the DNA match. After a brief surveillance, they collected a discarded coffee cup from William. The saliva provided a DNA profile that perfectly matched the killer's. In mid-May 2018, 30 years after the murders, investigators arrested William. He denied involvement, and the case went to trial in 2019. The defense attorneys sought to dismiss the DNA evidence, arguing that the semen on Tanya's body was likely consensual, and that there was no direct evidence tying William to Jay's murder. However, the prosecution had a strong argument. In 1987, fingerprints found on the van did not match Tanya, Jay, or anyone in the database. Those prints now matched William's. Another piece of evidence came from William's friend, who said he saw a brown truck parked in front of William's house in 1987 that was not William's. This suggests that William may have driven the truck home, though it is unclear whether it was before or after the crime. Additionally, William's home was only a few miles from where Jay's body was found, suggesting he was familiar with the area. None of William's relatives attended the trial, but they provided extensive information to investigators. They described him as consistently aggressive, and many family members feared him. Most cut off contact after he moved out. When they learned of the charges, they were not surprised and considered him capable of such crimes. The prosecution argued that William asked Tanya and Jay for a ride to Seattle under false pretenses. After they arrived at night, he allegedly used a gun to force them to drive to a remote location. He then killed them at separate sites, discarded Tanya's belongings, abandoned the van in another town, and avoided detection for 30 years. Despite the lack of a confession and some missing details, the evidence was compelling enough that almost no one doubted William's guilt. The trial concluded in June 2019. William was convicted of both murders and sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. It was the first case in which genetic genealogy led to a conviction. After the verdict, an unexpected issue arose. William's attorneys appealed, claiming the jury was biased, violating his constitutional rights and making the jurors unfit to serve. A judge overturned the conviction in 2021 and ordered a new trial. However, in 2022, a higher court reinstated the original conviction. William's possible involvement in other crimes remains unclear. He had prior convictions for lesser offenses, but had never been charged with murder. Investigators suspect he may be connected to other unsolved cases because the killings of Tanya and Jay did not appear amateurish. The methodical execution and his decades-long evasion of law enforcement suggest he may have killed before, though we may never know for sure.